Well, look, I guess the first question is, how does an Orthodox Jew with, 10 siblings become an international arms dealer? Is that a good place to start?
I guess that's...
And before people are like, it's the Jews, don't worry, he's a failed arms dealer.
Right. Thank you. That name makes it better, maybe?
Right. Yeah. Look, we can't be in the Illuminati if we're not doing a good job of being, infallible in our cabal to control things.
Right. I will say that from doing these podcast interviews, it's unfortunately really brought home to me the level of anti-Semitism out there. I get very large amounts of comments on, my Jewish background and, that being the source of all bad in the world. So, what can you do?
If it makes you feel any better, it's sort of a mark of you having done literally anything in your life that's played any outsized role that people can latch onto. There was a blog article a long time ago, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole because it's friggin' irrelevant, but it was like Jews of the podcasting community. And it's like all these podcasters that happen to be Jewish. And it's like, well, okay. I mean, it's still... It's like being the world's tallest midget. We're still podcasters. Who cares?
Right.
Like, really, who cares?
Yeah.
And the guy linked in that post to another post that was like Jew bloggers. And it's like, so you're saying that these guys who write on the internet are just happen to be Jews and that must mean something? I mean, talk about grasping at straws. It's like Jews who own ice cream shops. And it's like some kind of big conspiracy theory. I mean, like they're really thinking that this hits the like...
Nice. Very well done.
Yeah, you got it. All right. So your family is Orthodox Jews. You meet Efraim, your future business partner, played by Jonah Hill, but again, totally not Jonah Hill, at synagogue. And how does that go into... You end up with like a bedsheet business? This is random and very unsexy, which tells me either someone told you about it or you're really good at seeing angles other people don't see with respect to business.
So the way I got into the bedsheet thing, which was before the arms dealing thing, was it was just a friend of mine that I had met in Israel, cue the anti-Semitic comments.
Right.
And I had met someone in Israel who was in the nursing home supply business. Mm-hmm. And he was buying from distributors in the United States, various equipment, like including bed sheets, towels, etc. And he had told me, because at the time I was already importing SD cards from China and selling them on eBay.
Oh, okay.
And that was a great business at the time because it's extremely easy to transport. They're very tiny but relatively valuable. And nowadays, of course, it's all flooded with Chinese knockoffs. And so I wouldn't say that business is that good anymore. But at the time, it was a pretty good business. So I was doing pretty well. And he said, you have some experience sourcing internationally and importing things. Why don't you, if you can get me a better price on the bed sheets or the towels that I buy from these distributors, I'll buy from you. And, we'll both make some, I'll save money, you'll make money. And so I thought, that's a great idea. Why don't, it's not that, if you can find SD cards, why can't you find bed sheets? So I started researching and eventually realized that the bed sheets and towels, the best price were actually from Pakistan. And I started importing from there and selling to him and to a few other people. And that started growing that business, totally random. But I was doing, unlike the movie, I wasn't actually going to nursing homes in person and, trying to sell the whole bunch of bed sheets that I had unwisely bought and stuffed my apartment with. That's not what happened. I was just a broker. I would find, a large buyer and say, hey, these are my prices. And they'd be like, yeah, I'm interested in this, that, and the other. And I would just do the deal, just putting the supplier and the buyer together and, get a cut without actually even putting up my own money. So it was a pretty decent business. And about when I was about 23 years old, I was 23 at the time. I was doing the bedsheet business, the SD card business. I also was working part-time as a massage therapist. That part is true,
Okay.
in the movie.
Yeah.
I had gotten into that when I was 20. I had like a neck injury from a car crash, and I wanted to learn how to fix myself. And I realized that massage therapists made a lot more money than minimum wage, and which all my friends were working at the time while they were in college. And so I went to massage school and learned and got licensed as a massage therapist. And so I had a few multiple streams of income. I was also in school at the time studying chemistry, and that's when I bumped into Efraim. We had known each other since I was 16. He's actually 4 years younger than me. Unlike in the movie, they say we're the same age, but he's actually 4 years younger than me. So I met him when I was 16. He was 12. We were both in synagogue and didn't like to pray, so we both sneak out, and along with the other kids who didn't like to pray, which was most of them,
Yeah.
Very few kids enjoy praying. And so that's how we met, was because our families went to the same synagogue. And then his family shipped him off to LA because I think he got tested positive for weed. We both went to private Jewish schools, but different ones. So we weren't in the same school, but he got tested positive for weed. And so they said, "Oh, you're not taking the rules seriously. You're going to join the real world and work for your uncle." And his uncle owned a big pawn shop in South Central LA. And he got obsessed with guns. He just loved it. He started selling the guns that were in the pawn shop, and then he started buying guns on the gun boards using his uncle's name because he was 16.
Like forums.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the forums, exactly. He was 16 years old at the time, so he couldn't legally own a gun, but he used his uncle's name to buy guns and then sell them. And, he worked something out with his uncle so that they would split the profits. He worked for his uncle and his uncle also taught him how to bid to the government. So his uncle was selling equipment, handguns, ammunition, bulletproof vests, boots to the local and state police. And so he taught Efraim how to bid on these contracts, go through the government system and offer them various equipment that you want to sell. And so he learned how to do that and worked for his uncle for about 2 years. And then Efraim claims that his uncle screwed him out of 70 grand. His uncle claims that Efraim screwed him out of 70 grand. So, I believe both of them. Yeah,
that's a good diplomatic way to put it. I mean, you do have experience with one of those people.
Yeah, and I've heard about the other one. So his uncle doesn't have the best reputation either, in the industry. So he came back to Miami when he was 18 years old, and he took over his dad's like a corporate entity called AEY Inc., which makes it into the movie. His dad hadn't used this corporate entity for anything other than, I think, some label printing business that he had done years ago. It was more or less a dormant company. And so he took over that business and registered it with the federal government and started bidding on contracts. This was in 2004, which was right after the invasion of Iraq, and the United States had pretty much bombed Iraq to smithereens and was looking to rebuild it and make it into a democratic country. And so part of that process was supplying their government with various equipment, including the new police and army force with weapons and ammunition and various military supplies. So he started bidding on these contracts, started doing very well. And after about a year of working on his own, we bumped into each other at a mutual friend's house. As everyone does, what are you doing these days? And I told him about my sheet business and about the SD card business. And he was like, "Oh, that's really cool. That's more or less the kind of business I'm doing, finding suppliers overseas, negotiating on price, arranging logistics, arranging import permits, all those processes that you're doing. It's more or less the same thing I'm doing, but I bet I'm doing it on a much bigger scale than you. And so, maybe, we can work together. Maybe you can come work with me and we can make a lot more money together." And so I asked him, how much money have you made? Right? Natural question.
Yeah.
And he goes to me, he's like, "I'm going to tell you, but only to inspire you. Because I'm not bragging, okay?"
Right.
And so he opens up his computer and he logs into his bank account and he shows me his bank account, and it had $1.8 million in the bank.
Wow. And he's 20 something years old?
He's 18 years old.
Oh my
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And it's
Yeah.
not fake. It's not a screenshot. It's not
It's
him
not.
talking. It's like
He
he
logged
logged
in.
in.
He logged in. I saw him log in.
Wow.
He was not faking it, and I knew he hadn't gotten that money from his parents. I know who his parents are. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't give him that money. His grandfather is actually a billionaire,
Oh,
but
wow.
but his grandfather is also one of these characters that he doesn't give anything to anyone. You know, he's like kind of like a real Scrooge kind of
Yeah.
character.
Scrooge McDuck.
Yeah, exactly. Like his grandfather got into the papers because his grandmother had divorced him. Just to give you a little family background, his grandmother had divorced him. I think they had like 6 or 8 children together or something. I forgot how many. And it turned out that she found out when she divorced him that he had never married her legally in the first place. It was just a religious marriage, and so he decided that he was going to give her 0.
Wow. I
Yeah.
don't think that argument would fly with any judge,
Yeah.
though, after X number of years.
So
And
she
8 kids.
sued him. She sued him, and it was, I believe, the largest alimony case in history. She sued him
Yeah.
for $700 million.
Well, good
Yeah.
for her, because that's
Yeah, yeah.
BS. Like, he obviously
yeah.
had planned that, right? He's like, I want to
Yeah.
leave this bag. I'm going to just not pay her.
Right.
'Cause
I
I'm
mean,
a
they were
bastard.
married for like 40 years or something crazy.
Ugh,
I mean,
that's kind of gross. Yeah, that's gross.
So I mean, this is, not to speak badly about his whole family, but he's got, family members in there who, are that sorts of characters.
Like, where did he learn how to behave like this?
Yeah,
The apple has not fallen far from the tree. A lot of apples.
I will say that I know his dad, and his dad was a really upstanding, great person, and he's a fine person. So I won't say like his whole family. I won't speak badly about his whole family, but a few members of his family are not the most straightforward of characters, I guess you could say. So anyway, after he showed me that, I was like, holy crap. I mean, just like I had the same reaction that you had. I mean, I was blown away. I was like, this guy's 18 years old, and he has a 1.8 million in the bank after working for 1 year on his own. He obviously knows what he's doing. He knows this business, and he's making way more money than I'm making selling bed sheets or SD cards. So it seems like a pretty big opportunity. And so I said, okay, well, I'm in, and, teach me what you know. And I don't know if you want to go into like, how many details, but
I do have some questions. I mean, a lot of people are probably like, well, some of that money's operating capital. Doesn't matter. He still had to get the operating capital. The government doesn't just cut you a check when you start selling them something. I mean, government pricing might be worth doing a little minute on this. The margins, a lot of people don't know. They'll go like, oh, the government pays $500 for a toilet seat. I mean, okay, there's probably some stuff like that, but the margins are agreed by the government. You can't just be like, here's what it costs. It's like, here's what it costs, and here's what we'll pay you based on your costs, which we are auditing and looking at your sources and making sure that like you're not just lying so you can make a bunch of money.
So that is what you're talking about is a cost plus contract.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's different types of contracts with the federal government, and the cost plus contracts, they tend to usually reserve that for items that really only 1 or 2 or 3 companies can make. Like, for example, like F-35 fighter jets or nuclear bombs or, nuclear submarines or something that like really only like Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman or Raytheon could make. And, and so because there's very limited competition, they'll do what they call a cost plus, where they'll be like, you're going to open up your books, you're going to show us exactly what the costs are, and we're going to give you an agreed upon percentage, 1.5 or 2% on top of that will be your profit. And that's one way of doing things. Of course, that has some negative incentives, because then the more the contract costs, the more their profit ends up being. So they have an incentive to inflate their costs as much as possible, so they won't do things efficiently, which is why the government is famous for having cost overruns and paying way more. NASA faced this. NASA as a government agency did this for a very long time. And that's why their SLS rocket is extremely over budget. Pretty much every project that they've ever done is extremely over budget. They only started doing, this is a complete detour, but they only started, I'm a space fan.
No, I like it. I'm here for it.
Yeah. So they I think it was the commercial crew, or it was before that, the space station resupply missions that SpaceX competed under, that was their first real competitive projects. And those contracts ended up coming in on budget, on time, because the incentives were all aligned that, they had to do that. But the SLS project, which is the standard cost plus contract, is way over budget because the incentives are not aligned. But anyway, the contracts that we worked on were not cost plus. They were standard competitive contracts because we did not make F-35 fighter jets or anything in particular that they couldn't get anywhere else. We were dealing with commodity items like ammunition and weapons and bulletproof vests and things that 1,000 companies can make. So the way it works is the government will list what they want to buy on their site. And they will say, you have until this date to give us your best price. And then they collect the prices from all the companies that want to bid on this contract. They don't tell anyone what the prices that they're getting from the other companies are. So that's all a secret. So every company is incentivized to give the lowest possible price that they're willing to do in order to win the contract. And then the government takes all the offers and then they analyze it, and depending on what factors are important to them. Obviously, price is an important factor, and that plays a major role. But depending on the contract, there could be other factors like the reliability of the supplier, the proposed delivery date, the quality of the material that you're proposing to deliver. And they take all that and they have like a scoring system, and then they decide on what's the best value in total to the government, and they award that contract to the winner. And then that contractor has the opportunity to deliver on the items that they promised the government, that they contracted with the government to deliver. And once they deliver, the government inspects it. Once it passes inspection, they issue a certificate of conformance, they call it, a COC, which is a document stating they got the stuff and it passed inspection. And then they submit that to the payment department, and 30 days later, you get your money. So you do need to fund the contract until, from the point. So like if you are being a broker like we were, most companies are not going to ship you stuff unless you pay them in full, in advance. That's the vast majority. Some large companies with great credit may be able to buy things on credit, but most small middlemen will need to pay for things in advance before the supplier ships. Especially international companies, they won't give you any credit. I mean, that's out of the question. Only national companies within the United States would even consider it. So
that's worse than podcasting, by the way. Yeah. Those bastards. Right? Like you get net 30. I would kill for net 30, but no, I think it's like net 90 sometimes in podcasting. Now that I think about it, I mean, it can be bad, but then again, I'm not fronting $2 million for a bunch of rockets or ammunition, or more than 2 million. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, different government departments do have different standards. The vast majority of them do net 30, but there are some departments that will say this contract is net 60. It's not like a set in stone kind of thing. But most of the things that we dealt with were net 30, though sometimes they would be a little bit late paying. Like the State Department at the time, for some reason, still paid with paper check instead of sending you a wire, So it's just
it's painful to even hear about it. Yeah. God. But okay, how can the government even test doing business with literal kids? I mean, okay, fine. He's 18, you're 22. Have you met an 18 and 22-year-old and been like, I want to give these guys $5 million, or in your case, $300 million? I wouldn't even entertain the idea I wouldn't even take the call, man. I wouldn't.
Right. So the way they work is that for contracts for the government, a contract under $100,000 is considered small.
Okay. So that makes sense.
Yeah. So for most contracts that are under $100,000, they pretty much go by best price. So whoever offers them the best price, they'll roll the dice and see if you can deliver. And if so, you don't need any experience under your belt. You don't need to be able to prove that you're a reliable supplier in order to win these contracts. So once you have like 4 or 5 of those contracts, now you have what they call past performance, which is proof that you are a reliable supplier, at least for these items that you have proven that you can supply. And then you could bid on bigger contracts. You could bid on $1 million contracts plus. So by the time that we bid on the $300 million contract, which, was the high point of the movie, we had already delivered, I think, something around like 150 contracts to the government of various items.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And various sizes. I mean, we had already delivered, and by we, I mean the company, not me personally.
Right.
The company had already delivered, I think the largest contract at that time was, that the company had delivered was about $15 million. So
still high.
Yeah, so not nothing. A $15 million contract is significant. It's not $300 million, obviously, but it does show that the company is able to deliver large quantities of high value weapons and ammunition, which is what the government used as the basis for awarding us that large contract.
I assume most democracies have this kind of process because it's transparent and it's sort of capitalist and supposedly breeds efficiency, even though we found out that it doesn't. But this is a little bit of a tangent, but I'm guessing Russia doesn't have anything like this, right? And that may be why they have all these equipment issues in the Ukraine war, because corruption in this process would be so deleterious and inefficient.
Yeah, so I don't know what Russia's official procurement process is, but they are famous for, or I should say infamous for having corruption at all levels of the government, which is obviously when you have, and the corruption can take different forms. One of the most famous examples that we saw in the Ukraine war was that a lot of the convoy in the beginning that was heading towards Kyiv, a lot of their tires were blowing out because they were using cheap Chinese tires and not the standard military spec tires. And then you have to question, well, why was that? Well, it was probably because someone along the supply chain decided that they were going to pocket the difference. Mm-hmm. And so and you see that in many levels of the Russian military. You see that in their space program as well. There's a reason why their space program has stagnated since the fall of the Soviet Union, is because the entire system is really built on patronage and on corruption, where everyone is really just looking to get in the good graces of someone more powerful so that they could get a little piece of the corruption pie. And that obviously doesn't breed efficiency, because there's money going towards, oligarch yachts instead of towards where it's supposed to go. But it also doesn't breed innovation, because it's very disconcerting and very, very disheartening for the engineers of the rank and file people when they know that like the resources they need are just being squandered by the higher ups, and they don't get all the equipment they need, so they can't do the job that they need to do, but they also don't want to do it because they aren't getting a piece of that corruption pie. So, right. They're going to skate by with as little work as possible. I mean, and this kind of is a remnant of the whole communist system, where because there was no capitalist incentives for people to do a good job versus a bad job, everyone just did a mediocre job and did the minimum possible thing, because there was not really that much room for advancement and opportunity.
Or operated in the black market because they were like, my stuff's better, I should get a higher price. Oh, it's illegal? Okay, I'm just going to break the law. Or leave the country and defect and go to a place where my efforts are rewarded. I mean, we see that all the time. To be fair, a lot of people are going to go, well, wait, this bidding process sounds like it takes a really long time. I bet we're not doing that with Ukraine, because now it seems like Biden says, hey, Congress, I need $48 billion. And they go, okay. And then it's like, here's a bunch of weapons. It's a different sort of emergency situation, I assume.
Yeah, so with Ukraine, when they have like an emergency situation like that, the vast majority of the military equipment that was supplied to Ukraine since the start of the war was actually from the U.S. military's own stocks. So equipment that the U.S. military already owned and was keeping in reserve for themselves. So the U.S. military can give that immediately. They have their own logistics system, one of the best logistics systems in the world, their own planes and everything, and they could just fly it all into Ukraine and supply them immediately. Now what's going on is because the U.S. military has used up so much of its own stocks that now they're trying to replenish those stocks. So they are putting out for contract to the manufacturing companies to manufacture more of that equipment that they gave to Ukraine.
That makes sense, right? Because if you just say, hey, we're selling our own stuff because it's an emergency, there's probably a lot less hoops to jump through. And I know a lot of it is, hey, we're looking for Soviet era ammunition. So we're going to get it from Romania, which is not going through the United States sort of bidding process. And also the Ukrainian troops are trained on this equipment. Their guns fire that kind of ammo. So, but once that stuff's gone, it's like, well, now we need Northrop to make those rocket systems that are going to go there. And that's probably going to take a longer time.
Yeah, I mean, especially because the big issue is that because we live in a capitalist system and the military is the only buyer of these items, no one else buys anti-tank rockets, right?
Right.
So
yeah.
these companies that make this equipment, like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, they only have the minimum amount that they think, they have the minimum production line set up that they think is the government is going to require. And for the past 20 years, the U.S. military has been focused on anti-insurgency operations, which is very different than a large-scale land conflict where you have to take out tanks. The Islamic State, right, didn't have tanks, so they didn't have to manufacture these anti-tank rockets or anti-aircraft rockets because they weren't being used. So for the past 20 years, the U.S. military has a minimum level of stock that they feel that they would need in a conflict situation, but they only really stock it for themselves, right? For the various conflicts that they think that they might be involved in. They don't stock emergency supplies for a large land war in Europe, because that hasn't happened since World War II. No one was really expecting that. So now that that's happened, and suddenly we're shifting from a peace economy to a war economy, not obviously the whole economy, but
Sure.
but for these particular items, suddenly there's a demand for mortar shells that far, far exceeds what was a normal production rate in peacetime. And Ukraine is just eating it all up. Russia has massive quantities still left over from the Cold War, but they're starting to eat through that as well. So they're looking for some of the few friends they have, like North Korea and Iran, to step up and supply them. And now China, which it seems has been supplying them in secret, though they deny it. So everyone's scrambling for supply, and the United States and the West is scrambling to ramp up production because all those factories were on a peacetime footing, and now suddenly you've got a massive land war that's eating up. I think I read something like that Ukraine uses in 1 month of mortar shells what the United States could produce in a year.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so it's a major, major problem, and obviously the side that runs out of ammo first loses. So everyone's scrambling, and that's why Ukraine has been getting such a wide variety of weapons. They've been using their old Soviet weapons, but now they're getting some NATO weapons, but they're getting some weapons from France and from Germany and from the United States, and it's this whole mix. And like some of those weapon systems use different ammo and definitely different parts, and so it's a huge logistical headache for them. But they're happy to get what they can get because it's a matter of life and death, so they have to.
The stuff is cheap. The Ukrainians are already trained on it, right? This Warsaw Pact stuff. And the the Warsaw Pact stuff, Soviet stuff doesn't fit NATO arms, like you said, and it's just what a mess. I know that also. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but it is interesting. The Soviet weapons really don't need a lot of maintenance, right? So it's like the U.S. weapons. Part of the problem is it's like a Ferrari where the performance is out of this world, but you need to know how to drive the thing. You need to know how to take it apart and put it back together. Every part is specialized. You can't just take like a piece of metal and bash it into approximately the right shape to fit in there, for like a HIMARS or something. There's semiconductors all over the thing. So it's like that versus a Toyota Corolla where you're like, man, my muffler's making a loud noise. Everybody can hear me coming. You know what? Give me that metal, that ball peen hammer, that piece of aluminum, and give me some bolt cutters. I'll cut it into approximately the right shape, hammer it on this rock, and it's going to hold up until it doesn't.
Yeah, that has been the Warsaw Pact versus NATO mentality as far as their designing their weapon systems. The Warsaw Pact generally had lower level trained soldiers, so they had to make their equipment much more forgiving. It was there's a famous case in World War II where the tanks that they were producing in World War II, the pins that held the tracks on were kept on falling out. So instead of like creating on the tank. Okay. So, and so instead of creating a new system of fastening the tank tread to the tank, they pretty much just put this wedge of metal so that the pins, as they get loose, they hit the wedge of metal and it knocks it back in. So that was like a really that's a famous case of Soviet ingenuity, and just kind of speaks to their design philosophy of the absolute minimum and simplest solution, which isn't necessarily a good performance solution, but it is cheap and they can do very, very large quantities. So that permeates their entire design philosophy for all their weapons and ammunition and systems. And the AK-47 versus the M16 is the most famous example. The AK-47 is famously durable. You could like bury it in the mud for 10 years and it'll still fire. But it's not the most accurate thing. The M16 is a much higher performance weapon, but it takes a lot more maintenance, a lot more care, a lot more training to use. So yeah, which is why the United States decided to supply the Iraqis and the Afghanis, after they invaded those countries, to build up their army and police forces with those weapons and ammunition, because they're already trained on them, as you said, and they're also happen to be much cheaper, which saves the U.S. taxpayer quite a bit of money.
It all sounds good until you realize that the way to sabotage a tank is to use a crowbar and pull out a few of these pins, and now the thing drives and the frickin' tread falls off. Yeah, that's true. But luckily for the Soviets, they had 10,000 more where that came from. Right. So, and you see they're using the same philosophy now, where they're just throwing poorly trained soldiers into the meat grinder of the war. It's quite tragic for the people of Russia, because they don't bother. I mean, there were famous videos that came out, I think, earlier that showed that a lot of these conscripts that they're forcing to go to war are being supplied with like rusty weapons, and some aren't even being given weapons at all. And of course, the Wagner group is recruiting from the prisons, and they just use them as like a distraction, like the prisoners they just throw them over there, like into the battle space, and see where they obviously all get killed, but they, at least when the Ukrainians are forced to reveal their positions, to fire on these incoming people, and then the trained soldiers can handle those positions now that they've revealed themselves. But it's they have a very low value on human life, and they have no problem in just throwing people into the meat grinder without much hope of survival. Yeah, it reminds me of the Iran-Iraq war, where, and I don't know how credible this is. I think my mom told me about it in like the 80s or 90s, but they used to have like orphan children run across minefields, and they'd be like, all right, the mines are clear. And it's like, oh my God, please tell me that's not true.
Yeah, I don't. I don't know anything about that either.
But it's
that
sort of
sounds,
like the same principle.
yeah.
And it's just like,
Yeah.
okay, well, these are unwanted people and we're just
Right.
going to kill them. And
Yeah.
by, we're going to lie and say, if you survive this, you can go free. But
Right.
they're not going to survive this. So who cares?
Right.
Like, it's like that
Right.
kind of promise. It seems like you're really up on geopolitical events. Were you like that when you were a kid, or was it like, let's make some money with guns? And then you're like, hey, the whole political situation that we waltzed into is kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, I kind of got my education on the job, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
When I started, I had no idea about any of it. I was a musician. I was more interested in writing songs and, listening to music and, normal things as a person in their early 20s is interested in, and I just saw the whole arms thing as a lifetime opportunity of a lifetime, and then kind of had to learn on the job all the entire geopolitical situation of the world, because it affected our ability to deliver. When we would fly over certain countries, we had to know whether they were going to give us a permit, or, when planning logistics, and, what was the current political situation in that, because maybe they'll say yes now, but there's an election in a month, and there's some, like, depending on who's, standing for election and who's likely to win will affect on whether by the time we want to deliver, whether that country is still willing to give us an overflight permit. So I had to learn all these things that I really had no idea about before getting into the business, and then it just became interesting to me, and now I find it fascinating. Even though I'm not in that business. To be clear, I'm not in that business anymore.
Right? Yeah. The interest in politics has endured. The other parts have not.
Exactly.
But you guys do see, the book is full of different angles that you guys spotted. Tell me about this Xbox deal, because this is almost, it's like, how did big companies miss this? And you guys are like, let's go ahead and make 20 million selling friggin' Xboxes. Right.
So that was a strange situation. And to this day, I'm not 100% sure what the truth is about it. What happened there was, actually, before I started working with the arms business. Because I was importing SD cards at the time, I was talking to all these electronics wholesalers, and at the time the Xbox had just been released, the original Xbox, and that's how long ago it was. The Xbox was a huge smash hit, and it got sold out of all stores. And nobody had it. It was like being sold for triple the price on eBay at the time. And then one of my contacts from buying SD cards said, hey, I've actually got a whole bunch of Xboxes that are for sale. And I said, well, that's obviously a great opportunity, because everyone's looking for Xboxes. So, but it was way more. I think he offered me like 1,000 Xboxes, which was way more than I had money for. And so I talked to Efraim, and I'm like, hey, I've got this opportunity to do this deal with Xboxes. I know you've got some money, right? You showed me, right? So, you interested in doing this? And he was like, oh yeah, that sounds very interesting. He talked to the guy, and then it turned out that this guy was just a broker for someone else. And so somehow, and Efraim, I'll give him credit, is a very talented, he's a very talented negotiator, but he's also he can convince people very, very, very well to do things that they won't necessarily want to do. He's a really great, I don't know what the term is. Persuader. That was the word. It's on the tip of my brain.
I think you were trying not to say con artist, but that's yeah. Yeah, he's a persuader. My words,
that
not
too.
yours.
He is that. But so he managed to get the guy who was my contact to introduce us to his contact, and then that guy said, "Oh well, the minimum order is 3,000 units," and we're like, "Okay." And then it turned out that he was a broker for someone else, and he got him to introduce us to his contact, and we went through 5 layers. I'm not exaggerating here. It was like literally 5 different layers of brokers until we got to a company that it was, I forgot the name of the company offhand, but I remember at the time that it was a large multi-billion-dollar electronics wholesaler. So it was not a nobody. And we were talking to people from the company because they had the official company address, which was why we thought it was real.
It's amazing that, though, like, hey, we have this lot of a really hot product. Everyone wants it. Let's talk to two random dudes that we met through 3 Chinese contacts. It's like, how are you not calling Walmart and being like, hey, we noticed you're out of Xboxes. Do you want 20,000 of them? We have them.
Which was so strange, that part makes me think that it was some sort of scam. But if it was a scam, it was by a scam from people within this large, electronics, or it could be that they pulled something shady within their company. And they were trying to offload this stuff.
Stuff 100,000 of these in a warehouse. Nobody will know. It'll be sold out, and then we will sell the crap out of these, and we'll retire right after that we do it.
So, one thing that some Chinese manufacturing companies are infamous for is doing production overruns. So, Microsoft will contract, let's say a company to produce a million Xboxes, and they'll make 1.1 million, but they won't tell Microsoft about it. But they will only make enough that they think they could sell without Microsoft noticing. So it can't be like a huge amount extra, but it could be enough that they could double, triple their profit margins that they're making from this contract with Microsoft. So, and this is something that, especially in the early days of Chinese manufacturing, which is back then in like 2006, when this was happening, this was pretty common. So I suspect that it might, if it was not a complete scam, it probably was something gray market like that, not necessarily illegal, but definitely against their commercial contract with Microsoft. So that's probably what was happening. They didn't want to have like a direct contact between them and Walmart, because Walmart obviously is going to, advertise the shit out of this and say, hey, we've got Xboxes coming. Then Microsoft will be like, where'd you buy that? And they'll be like, these guys, I thought they were official distributors. And Microsoft is like, well, we thought that, they are already sold out, because that doesn't add up. So, and then someone's going to get in a lot of trouble. So they were trying to sell it, a little bit
on the low,
under the radar. Yeah.
And it was like 100,000 Xbox consoles, right? It's not like a few hundred or even a few thousand. It's a massive amount. And it was, what's the value of that? Retail value of that's like $20 million or something at that point.
Yeah. It was, I remember it was we needed $20 million to buy it. And we had already gotten a buyer from Walmart and Target who had agreed to purchase it from us at the retail price. Really? So they weren't even going to make any profit on it. They were it was such a hot item that they wanted to use it as what they call a loss leader, where they have an item that is really in demand, and even though they're losing money on it, people will come in and to the store and buy something else because they are attracted to go buy an Xbox. So while they're buying an Xbox, they'll buy some accessories or a game or something. And so Walmart will make money like that. And so they were willing to buy it from us at the full retail price. And the distributor was willing to sell it to us, I believe, somewhere along the lines of around 60 or 70% of the retail price. So we stood to make like a good $6 or $8 million on this if we could pull together 20 million.
Wow.
And we tried. I mean, we worked for like a good solid week and a half, 2 weeks, looking, pretty much asking everyone to invest in us. And we even got some meetings with some like hedge funds in New York, and it just didn't pass the smell test. It was what they said. Right. They declined it because even though like all the suppliers were willing to do a letter of credit, which meant that, they wouldn't get paid until they actually delivered the goods. So it wasn't like it was going to be a total scam because we'd be able to inspect the merchandise before the funds were released. So the payment process was solid, but as the hedge fund guys said, it just didn't pass the smell test, which I totally understand. It doesn't even pass the smell test for me, these days. So, eventually that ended up falling apart, and nothing happened with that, at least not with us.
Yeah, the hedge fund guys are probably like, this is a great opportunity that shouldn't exist. Something is wrong. We can't put our finger on it. So we don't really want to be in a position where the feds are seizing the profits or the money that we spent on or the devices themselves when they hit customs, because it turns out these are Y boxes and they're made with all the same parts and they run the games, but they're not really licensed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So that all makes sense. So I love this story because it really does paint you guys as very savvy but also like really focused on money. And I know Efraim was obsessed with money. You mentioned there's this casual anecdote where he's talking with federal contractors while he's having sex with his girlfriend, which is gross and weird. But like, this is what gets him off, not the girl. Yeah. It's like he's like, I'm negotiating.
Yeah. He would brag about this to us. Actually, that's the only reason I even know about it. I mean, I'm not there looking, but he would brag. He's like, so I was like, banging my girlfriend, and then I got a call from the contracting officer, and I told her, hey baby, you keep on doing what you're doing. I got to take this call.
Oh my
God. Of course she hates it, but she knows where her bread is buttered on. He was so gross. Yeah.
It's so gross. It is so gross, but it paints a picture of just like exactly the type of guy that you expect him to be once you actually find out what this guy's like. And you guys must have had Nick Cage posters all over the office. Right?
Yeah. He Lord of War was definitely Ephraim's. It was his favorite movie by far. He thought it was the coolest movie ever. And for his birthday, actually, I bought him one of the famous Lord of War posters, which is a picture of Nick Cage's face that's made out of bullets. And he loved it so much he put it like right behind his desk, like so when people would come into his office, they would see like the big Nick Cage poster right behind him above his desk. Yeah.
If only. He just didn't know how to have his own poster made with his own face made out of bullets. That's what he was really wanted. Yeah,
sure.
Of course he would have.
100%.
I'm surprised he didn't take some of the actual ammo you guys got in trouble for selling and have a sculpture made of himself made out of bullets. That's what I would have done if I was a gaudy arms dealer. In fact, I'm thinking about doing it now. It looked really good behind me. Just saying.
He actually, I saw later. I mean, this was later, not during the time, but he did commission some artists to make a portrait of him.
It's like
it wasn't
basic.
Yeah.
It's like a starter pack for narcissists. Like you need a sculpture and or a painting of yourself in your office. That's you looking at like everyone dominating them, really high up on the wall too, not eye level.
Exactly. Yeah.
The deal, the morality of some of these deals, I'm wondering if this got to you at all, because there's one where I think it was the king of Nepal wanted to buy weapons because there was an uprising, and it was like, let's sell this guy weapons to kill a bunch of his own citizens. And then it's like, well, do we want to do that?
Yeah, that one was that was really early on when I started working with him. Like a few weeks into it, and that one really threw me off because so what happened was after the whole Xbox thing fell through, he said, hey, let's get back to business that I know we can make money on. Let's do the government contracting business. I'll teach you how to do it. And we'll, you'll go for items that are, I'm not really focusing on, so that we could expand the business, and and we'll split the profit 50-50. You'll do all the work. Mm-hmm. I'll provide the money. I'll do the negotiation. We'll use my company's licenses and all that, and we'll split it 50-50. And so I said, that's great. And he's like, well, I mainly focus on military equipment and munitions and weapons. But I know there's, energy is a huge sector for the government. They buy massive amounts of oil and gas and various energy commodities. And so why don't you focus on that? So I started doing that. I the first contract I won with the federal government was for 50,000 gallons of propane. It was with the U.S. Air Force. I delivered it to U.S. Air Force Base in Wyoming, and won that within, I think, the first month of starting. Made $8,000 for myself, not so bad for a first contract. And while that was happening, I was working in the office with him. Well, his apartment. We were using his apartment as an office.
Yeah, startup life.
Yeah,
Hashtag
exactly.
startup life. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for real. He had this big desk in the middle of his living room, and it was just covered in like stacks of papers because he loved printing things out. So like whenever we'd get a contract, he'd print out the entire contract, and that's usually like between 30 and 50 pages with all the addendums and everything. And he was working on so many different things at the same time. It just like became this huge mess. So I was working at it, in his apartment, and obviously hear what he's talking about on the phone, and he started working on. He got through one of his contacts in the industry, someone who wanted to supply the king of Nepal. And we looked up what was happening with Nepal, and it turns out there were all these pro-democracy protests happening in the country, and so the king wanted to buy like attack helicopters and heavy machine guns, and like a large amount of them, and various crowd control equipment. And Ephraim was like, yeah, let's do this. We'll put together a save the king package. He was talking to his contact on the phone, and I told him, I'm like, Ephraim, that's like, first of all, are you sure that's like legal? Because,
it doesn't sound legal.
Because that's like, I'm pretty sure the U.S. government wouldn't be happy with you supplying a monarch in order to suppress a pro-democracy government. Are you sure that's legal? And it's kind of up, even if it is legal. And he's like, looks at me and he's like, just worry about your fuel contracts, bro. Okay, you leave this shit to me. Okay,
Cool. I'll just be your accomplice because I'm also going to get in trouble for this since I'm right next to you. But okay, why not?
Yeah. So I was like, wow, that's very concerning. I wasn't working on it with him, and so I guess that's what I told myself at the time. I'm like, well,
tell it to a judge.
He's doing it, not me. I'm working on fuel contracts, and so that's how I made, I excused it to myself, but it was extremely disturbing. And luckily that whole thing fell through. I think the king managed to negotiate something. So the contract got canceled and he didn't end up buying all those things. So,
wow. So you're dealing with other arms dealers in other regions who are thinking like, oh, okay, well, where do I get attack helicopters? And I can't buy them from the U.S. government. Let's buy them from somebody who buys them from a supplier. It just seems like there's 16 brokers between you and the end user for some of these deals.
For some of the deals, yeah. I mean, because there's different ways that the arms business works. There's obviously the factories that manufacture these things in the first place, and that is usually the most expensive way to buy things. You buy something brand new, but because all the militaries in the world tend to stock up on military equipment, and in the best of times they don't get used, and sometimes countries' priorities shift, and then they try to change their military equipment, or something gets a little bit too old for their liking and they try to sell it, to get rid of it. And there's other countries that are totally okay with buying a little bit older equipment as long as they get a good discount. So there's a large opportunity for brokers to do these kinds of deals. And that really all comes down to who you know and who you have connections with, because there isn't no like worldwide database of all the military equipment that every country owns, and that's available. There's no Amazon of military equipment. Maybe now that I said that, someone's going to create that.
Yeah, I was going to say, great idea.
Yeah. So it really comes down to the kind of connections you have. And a lot of countries, especially countries that are not first world transparent democracies, they are run on systems of patronage and corruption. And so you need some sort of personal connection with the government or with the powers in that country in order to do these kinds of deals. And if you don't have that connection, you need to find someone who does. So that's where all these middlemen come in, because it's like, I know a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy, and
right.
and everyone gets their cut along the line. and including the crooked politician or military official who is making this deal happen.
Right. So you've got the supplier has to sell it to you and then go through the chain to get to the buyer. And each person along the way is probably like, well, I got to make a little 10% margin here. So it's inflated crazily by the time it gets there, but it still has to be somewhat competitive, or you have to bribe the guy more than the other company does or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. So it depends on the specific situation. So the more desperate the buyer is, the higher price they're willing to pay. So if like there's an emergency situation and it's a matter of life or death, they're willing to pay pretty much anything because what's good money for them if they're dead. Now if they are not in a rush, and then price becomes more of an issue, and then they can shop around a bit more. So it really depends but sometimes the buyer is corrupt themselves, and they don't really care how much money they're spending as long as they can pocket some of that money as well. So there are different situations in these kinds of deals that can inflate or deflate the price.
Interesting. Okay. Well, in the movie, Bradley Cooper plays this guy. His name's like Heinrich Tome.
Yeah,
is it Heinrich Tome? Yeah.
Heinrich Tome. We called him Henry.
Henry, yeah. He's a Swiss arms dealer. But who is this guy? Because he seems like the kind of guy who goes, I don't care what the weapons are for, right? He's, I don't want to say your mentor, but certainly a good contact for you guys.
Right. So Henry is probably definitely the most successful arms dealer we ever met. He'd been in the business since he was 18 years old, but he was at the time we knew him, in his 40s. I guess now he's probably in his 50s, maybe even 60s at this point. Efraim met Henry through Ralph. So, and Ralph was in the movie, Ralph is this Jewish laundromat owner. Okay. And who is the investor, right? But in real life, Ralph is a real person, and he really was our investor. But he was actually a Mormon who owned a machine gun factory in Utah.
Okay,
so very different kind of character. Yeah, different. They really changed him in the movie, but they kept the name the same, which was he met Efraim met Ralph actually through his dad. His dad was doing government contracting, but for non-lethal stuff, for like boots and clothing and normal commodities like that. And I don't know how Michael, Ephraim's dad, met Ralph. I think through one of those deals. But when Efraim won his first federal contract, he was looking for an investor, because remember, as I said, you need to put up the money yourself before the government pays you 30 days after you deliver. So Efraim was looking for an investor, and his dad introduced him to Ralph. Ralph funded his first deal, and they made money, and Ralph was thrilled, and so he agreed to continue funding his deals. And so they did a whole bunch of deals together. And Ralph had known Henry since I think the 90s. They had done a deal where Henry, it was, I believe, illegal to purchase at the time like weapons from like apartheid South Africa. Mm-hmm. And so Henry found a way around that by taking the guns apart and selling all the parts, I think, except the receiver, which was the only part that was legally considered a gun by the United States. And so he sold all the parts to Ralph, and Ralph put them back together in his machine gun factory and just manufactured the missing part.
Oh, wow. And
so he made a huge amount of money from, through that deal. It was all legal, of course, because they managed to find that loophole. So that's how they established their relationship. And when Efraim and Ralph started doing business together, Ralph introduced him to Henry, and Henry is a Swiss, as you mentioned, a Swiss arms dealer. He had connections all over Europe. He was especially strong in the Balkans. He had personal connections with a lot of the power players in the Balkans. And so he was able to get Efraim very, very good deals on a lot of the weapons and ammunition that he was purchasing for the U.S. Army in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Later on, we found out that it came out in the papers that Henry had been the subject of a Amnesty International report. That
never a good thing.
Yeah, never a good thing. Exactly. They suspected him of supplying some warlords in Africa. But I don't know if I don't believe it was ever definitively proven. He was just placed on a watch list of, guys to be concerned about, not necessarily a banned list. So as far as I'm aware, it was still illegal for us to do business with him.
I see.
Maybe not ethical, but legal. And and he was, people. So in the movie, Bradley Cooper plays him like a badass, like he's yelling, he's screaming, he's like, has a hooker in his room, he's like, he really played him like a badass. But in real life, Henry was he had more of the personality of like a Swiss banker. He was always dressed in a really nice suit, perfectly brushed hair, very calm voice, never raised his voice, never got excited. Everything. It was like he was selling potatoes. It was, there was nothing to get excited. He was just, doing a regular, boring job, and he very professional. And I guess that's probably why he lasted so long. And he's still in business. He's still out there doing deals. I've heard, last I heard, he had some $1 billion contract with the Russian military to like refurbish their Air Force or some parts of their Air Force. But this was years ago. This is before the Russian war. So I don't know what he's doing now and what his I've lost contact with him. We're not besties anymore. So.
Got it. Yeah. Does no longer follows me on TikTok.
Exactly.
Yeah. That sort of answers the question of why he needs you guys at this point. Because if he's on a watch list, he might be like, well, I don't really want to pop my head up for all these little deals. Maybe I'll let these kids go do some legwork, and then I'll just give them good pricing and skim off the top until the heat dies.
Yeah, that's probably what it was. I also don't believe that he was registered with the U.S. government, probably for that reason. But, as I mentioned before, it's not enough just to be registered. You also have to build up a certain amount of past performance history in order to be eligible for the very large contracts. And I think, I could imagine the reasons as, are similar to what you were saying, but he never stated his reasons for not bidding directly with the federal government. We just kind of assumed he wanted to keep his head low. And he was supplying not just us, but he was supplying a few other contractors who were supplying the U.S. government. So he was the source for quite a few U.S. government contractors.
Tell me about the Afghanistan contract. This is the big one that eventually, spoiler alert, gets you guys in big trouble. But why is Afghanistan buying anything from you instead of buying directly from the U.S. or Russia, for that matter, or even like South Korea? They make a bunch of arms. Why do a deal with you yutzes? No offense.
Right. None taken. So the Afghans were not buying directly from us. They were being supplied by the U.S. Army. So what happened was after the United States invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, and pretty much bombed the people in power to smithereens, they decided that the best way forward was to attempt to build a democracy in that country, a democratic government that was friendly to the West. In Afghanistan, famously failed, right? Mm-hmm. After 20 years of trying. Yeah. Iraq is, teetering on democracy, but, is still, I guess, an official democracy at this point.
Yeah, not a shining example. But
not the best.
Matter. Yeah,
right. Not doing that great, but anyway. And so part of the rebuilding process, the reconstruction process, was building these institutions. The idea was that the United States would eventually leave. The United States, doesn't have any policy of staying and taking, there was no idea of annexing Iraq or annexing Afghanistan and making it the 51st and 52nd state of the United States, like what Russia is trying to do with Ukraine. That wasn't the plan. The plan was to go and take out this unfriendly government and do a regime change to put in a friendly government. So part of that is in order for the friendly government to stay in power, is they needed to have a police force and a military, and to fight the insurgents and their neighbors if they would attack them. And because the Afghanis and the Iraqis were already trained on the Warsaw Pact weapons, as we mentioned before, the United States decided to supply them with those kind of weaponry. They were already trained on it. It also happened to be like 5 times cheaper, so that was a bonus. But the United States doesn't manufacture these weapons. So the United States manufactures weapons of NATO caliber, NATO standards. So to get a large quantity of Warsaw Pact weapons and ammunition, they had to go to someone else. And originally they had to go speaking about the Afghan contract that we won specifically, that was the idea there. That was put out in 2006. George Bush was president, and the Bush administration felt that the next president was because he was extremely unpopular at the time. His poll numbers were terrible. So they thought, there's a good chance that the next president is going to be a Democrat. And they thought the next president, they were right, Obama was the next president, but they thought the next president was going to pull out of Afghanistan immediately and leave them to their own devices, which he was wrong. It took until Biden to do that. So, but the plan was, because they thought the next president would abandon Afghanistan, they wanted to arm the Afghanis to have enough weapons and ammunition for like the next 30 years. And so they were looking to buy massive quantities of munitions in particular, because munitions is something that's you eat it up, right? Just like we see in Ukraine, they're consumables. That's the term I was looking for. So because of that, they wanted to have massive quantities of munitions. And originally, the U.S. Army went to the Russians directly and asked them to supply this massive quantity of munitions. This came out in some news article I read later, but the Russians originally thought that they were joking because the quantities were so enormous. But the U.S. Army had to ask them multiple times, and they said, no, we're actually serious. We really want to buy this quantity. And the Russians said, sure, and they gave them a price. And then before they could finalize the deal, it came out that the Russians were supplying nuclear technology to the Iranians. And the United States got very upset about that and put the Russians on a blacklist, and which made it illegal for the U.S. Army to buy these munitions from the Russians. And so then they had to start looking for other sources of supply. And there was no other single source of supply that could supply this quantity. Only the Russians could do it. So they figured, instead of dealing with 50 different suppliers, from every former Soviet bloc country out there, and having to deal with every headache out, that entails, they're going to open it up for a broker type contract, and they put it out in their usual contracting procedures. They put the list, I think it was 30 something different types of munitions with massive quantities of each, and they said, give us a package deal, give us a total price. And we bid on that contract. We didn't really think we were going to win. It was
right. I was going to say, how did you even think you would win something like this?
Yeah. I mean, we didn't really expect to win, but because it was all the kinds of munitions that we had already been selling to Iraq and Afghanistan, we knew we technically qualified because we had the past performance history. So because there was a technical, we weren't automatically disqualified. We felt, well, in that case, we have to at least give it a shot.
Right?
Yeah,
even though it's like 20 times bigger than anything you guys had done in the past.
Exactly. Literally 20 times bigger, yes.
Wow. Wow. Because I wouldn't, this is the kind of, this is what makes you guys successful at the end of the day, right? It's like most people would go, okay, Lockheed Martin's probably bidding on this. General Dynamics is bidding on this. Raytheon or whatever is bidding on this. The government of Uzbekistan is bidding on this. Why would, I'm not even going to fill out this PDF. And you guys are like, nah, let's do it. And
yeah, it was a lot of work, actually. It wasn't just filling out a PDF.
No, of course not. Of course not. But even if it was filling out a PDF, most people would go, to hell with this. This is a waste of digital ink to even submit this thing.
Right.
And wow. Okay. And how do you decide what to bid? Because you have to choose the pricing. It's very complex. Then you've got to choose a margin. How do you even come up with the price tag for this?
So the way we did that, well, first what we did was we got a price from everybody we could find.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
So Efraim obviously asked all his suppliers for their best pricing on all these items. And then he tasked me, and this was my role in the contract, to find new suppliers that he was not aware of, that he had not dealt with before. And so I scoured the internet. I must have gone 50 pages deep into Google searches. I'm not even kidding. And I built these massive spreadsheets of every supplier, and half of them weren't even in business anymore, or the other half didn't speak English. It was a mass, and they were all in Eastern Europe, so I had to do this all
4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of them didn't have emails. They only had fax numbers, and so it was a massive pain. It was a very grinding, time-consuming pain. But after a few months of work, we had I was able to find suppliers that filled in the holes of where Efraim's suppliers were missing. And we had what we thought was a pretty competitive bid. Also, Henry gave us a really good deal on the AK-47 ammo, which was a big component of the contract. And that would later get us in trouble because we later found out why that ammo was so cheap, but we didn't know it at the time. After we got all the suppliers in the spreadsheet, and we also had to calculate what the estimated logistics cost, because the government wants you to give them a delivered price, not a cost plus shipping price.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Shipping is always included to the government.
It's like Prime, Amazon Prime.
Exactly. Shipping has to be included. So once we calculated the estimated shipping cost for each supplier, and we called up the suppliers Efraim would do this. He was very good at this. He would call them up 5 times and just bother them until they agreed to lower their price even a tiny bit. He'd just keep on pestering them until they would and come up with all these crazy reasons why they need to give him a better price. He was very good at this. He loved to say, one of his lines was, he'd love to say, a negotiation is a contest between two people over who could come up with a better reason for things to go their way.
Yeah. I mean, meanwhile, all these other guys are like, whatever. But yeah, he's probably also not afraid to say, if you do this, there's all these other deals that are lined up.
He was the master of BS. I mean, he would promise people the world. He would say things in ways that you could take it in 2 ways. So he'd have a way to get himself out of it if you would call him out on it later. He was a master manipulator, a master liar. He was extremely, extremely talented at it. And that made him a very, very powerful, very capable negotiator. And so he got all the suppliers to knock down their prices as low as they were willing to do. And then we had our price. And then it was time for us to put our margin, what we wanted to make on it, before we bid it to the government. And Efraim figured he was torn, because he figured everyone else was going to do 10%. That's what he thought.
Okay.
Because it's just, a round number, relatively low, so he thought everyone would do 10%. That was just, we obviously have no way to know that, but that's what he thought. So he figured he would do 9%. But then he started thinking to himself, but wait a second, what if someone else had the same thought that I had, that, that everyone else is doing 10%, so I'll do 9%. So then in that case, we need to do 8%. So he was like, but nobody's going to think that. So we don't have to do 7%. So it's really just 8% or 9%, depending on which level of, the other people are thinking. So he was torn. He's like, should we do 8%, 9%, 8%, 9%? And he dawdled until it was like literally like half an hour before like the deadline. This was one of the few contracts we had to submit in paper. Most contracts you just submit as a PDF online. Okay. But I don't know why.
It is a PDF.
Yeah.
I was right.
Yeah. No, it's actually a combination of PDF and spreadsheets. But yeah, you are correct. PDF and Excel spreadsheets. So we had a deadline and we had to actually ship it overnight from the post office. And the post office was going to close in like 30 minutes and he still hadn't decided on whether to do 8% or 9%. And I told him, Efraim, just pick something. It could be anything. We're going to for sure lose if you keep on not deciding. And he's like, fine. I can't leave money on the table. So let's do 9%. So we punched that into the spreadsheets. We printed everything out. The printer broke halfway through we had to like change the printing, the ink cartridges. It was like, the time is ticking. We finally left the office at like 10 minutes before 5 p.m. when the post office was going to close. Efraim, is like driving at like 70 miles an hour down like suburban local roads, where like the speed limit is like 25 miles an hour. He's like driving like a maniac. We like skid to a stop in the parking lot in front of the post office. Run. They were about to lock the doors and he like busts past the guy, like knocks the postal worker to the side, and he's like, I gotta do this. The post, they almost, I saw the look on their face. They almost didn't take it because he was just such a dick, but they're like, fine. We'll take it. And,
God.
And they did it. Yeah.
I had a friend like this named Ofer that from middle school all the way through college, and he'd be working on something all night, zero sleep, that's due at 8 o'clock in the morning after procrastinating for like a month until 4 o'clock that morning. And he'd be on the phone with his mom and he's pacing and he's so nervous. And I'm like, just start the thing. What are you doing? It's 3 a.m. We're all like drunk and everything. And he's just like, I got a bunch of work to do. But the amount of stress that these types of guys live in,
right.
And tell me what you think. It's horrible to even be around it because it's so contagious, and you're just sitting there like, get away from me! You're freaking me out. Yeah.
It's extremely stressful because they're stressed like it bleeds onto you, because they're stressed, so you're stressed. And, I put a lot of work into that contract. I spent like a good 2 months of sleepless nights, scouring the internet and talking to people, from Eastern Europe and sending faxes and all these things. And then he was going to blow it because he couldn't decide on whether it was 8 or 9% and couldn't make a decision in time. So I was extremely stressed that he was just going to, make us lose before we even got a chance to run the race, so to speak.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. But, he drove fast enough down those roads and didn't hit any child on the way. So we made it.
Fine.
Yeah.
How do you then plan to get the weapons into Afghanistan? Because are you going to drive from Pakistan? That seems a little dodgy. It's a war zone.
Right. So we considered all these different ways. So Afghanistan's a landlocked country. So the only way was either air, which was extremely expensive because, flying things by air, it was, I think, something like 5 times the price.
Of course,
than by ocean. Or the only other option was over land. But to do that, we would either need to go through Pakistan, which was an extremely unstable country, still is, or over land through the Central Asian countries. And for that, we had to transverse through Russia as well. And they didn't really want us to do that. The Russians were very upset to have been cut out of this contract. And we found out later that they were doing all sorts of maneuvers to try to make us fail to deliver, because they thought that if we failed to deliver, that the U.S. Army would come running back to them and beg them to buy the ammo, despite the blacklisting. So they were trying to try to convince the Central Asian countries, who are still very much in their orbit, to refused to give us overflight permits when we decided to fly it in.
Oh, wow.
They really tried to make us fail. And so we didn't want to take the chance of going through Pakistan because we were told that it's a high likelihood that some warlord is just going to seize the shipment.
Sure.
And then you supply a warlord with all this ammo, which is not a good thing.
Right. Somehow you get in trouble for that, even though it wasn't your fault. Yeah.
Right.
Or just Iran takes out the whole convoy with a drone or something, or a militia.
Exactly. So we realized that the only safe way to do this was by air. And even though it was extremely expensive and we would have made a huge amount more money if we had done it over land, but at least it's going to get there and we'll make something instead of nothing. And so, so it was really, it felt like our only option, really. So but of course, it's extremely expensive to ship everything, and by with air freight, it's all depends on the price of oil, because that's the vast majority. I think something like 80% of the cost of air freight is the fuel. So at the time that we won the contract in early 2007, there was a huge spike in oil prices. And a large responsible company would have bought like a hedge their bets, bought an oil hedge, so that in case this happened, it was kind of like insurance. You would get paid for the oil price going up, and you would use that to cover your losses on the increase of the air freight. Of course, that wasn't Efraim's style. So he didn't like buying insurance, so he didn't. And then we kind of got stuck in a situation where the price of oil meant that we couldn't deliver a lot of the ammo that we had promised to deliver profitably. We would have been losing money on it, especially the AK-47 ammo, which Henry was supplying us. So we thought, well, how can we solve this? And I realized that the AK-47 ammo that Henry offered us was packed in these very heavy wooden crates. And if we could just remove the wooden crates, then maybe we can save a bunch of weight and at least make it, I don't know if it'll be completely profitable, but at least we won't lose as much money.
Right.
But we had no idea how much those crates weighed. So we sent one of my best friends, Alex Podrisky, to Albania to go weigh the crates, because we didn't trust the Albanians to give us accurate information.
Sure.
In the movie, I go to Albania, but because they didn't want to add another character in the film. But I was already dealing with the U.S. government contracting officers here, and I was dealing with all the other aspects of the contract with the Bulgarians and looking for other sources of supply, like from Kazakhstan and Ukraine, and so like I didn't have time to do this job. So we sent my friend Alex to do that. He gets there and he weighs the crate, and it turns out to weigh quite a lot. And by getting rid of the crates, we would make it actually profitable instead of losing money. But while he was inspecting it, he said, "Hey, these crates, they have like all sorts of Chinese markings on them. This ammo is from China, right?" And we're like, "What are you talking about? That's from Albania." And he's like, No. It's got Chinese all over it. It's definitely Chinese."
Oh, man.
And we're like, we didn't know that, because our contract specifically said no Chinese ammunition can be delivered under this contract, because in 1989, there was the Tiananmen Square massacre in China, where the Chinese military suppressed this pro-democracy movement of these university students and killed hundreds, if not thousands, of students. And so as a punishment for the Chinese military doing that, the United States put them on an arms embargo. And so it's illegal for U.S. companies and citizens to purchase or sell military equipment with the Chinese. So the U.S. Army put no Chinese ammunition can be supplied either directly or indirectly, was the actual wording in the contract.
Yikes.
So we realized, well, this kind of violates our contract. We can't.
Sure.
According to our contract, we cannot deliver this. But we realized this ammunition is actually from the 70s.
Oh, so
before there was
before
an
the
arms zone.
massacre. So like,
Before,
it should fall through this
exactly.
loophole in
Right.
the
Well,
contract.
I mean,
Or not.
legally,
Yeah.
if you bought ammunition or an AK-47 or anything while it was legal, like let's say 1988, right? And you bought it and you imported it into the United States legally. Even in 1990, after you can't deal with the Chinese anymore, you can still sell that weapon. You still own that weapon legally and sell it to whoever you want. That's a legal weapon because you bought it legally. So it's not like the embargo made all Chinese weapons everywhere illegal. It was just illegal to do business with the Chinese, right? So technically, according to the embargo, this ammunition in Albania was legal. However, our contract didn't specify that. Our contract didn't say anything. It didn't say anything about the embargo. It didn't say you can only supply weapons that, don't violate the embargo, right? That's what it should have said. But instead it said no Chinese weapons, directly or indirectly, period, full stop.
Lazy drafting. Contract drafting.
Exactly. So we thought, well, okay, we've got two options, right? We could either, tell them about it, and say, hey, U.S. Army, we're very sorry. We know our contract says no Chinese, but this stuff does not violate the embargo. Can we get a letter of exemption for this particular ammunition? And they could have said, yeah, that makes sense. We were lazy in drafting the contract, so here's a letter of exemption. Go ahead. We really need the ammo, right? Or they could have said something along the lines of, well, actually, all your competitors were bidding with this clause in the requirements. So it's not fair. It's not fair to them that you can deliver this stuff because they weren't allowed to bid this. So, just in the interest of fairness, we're going to have to take this $300 million contract away from you and put it up for bid again. Oof. And we're like, do we want to take that risk? Or should we just not tell them about it?
Right. What's Efraim's style, right? What would Efraim do?
Yeah.
Not the right thing. Hey, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There's a lot more just like this. You can find the Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to the show.
So Efraim made the choice, of let's not just tell them about it. I mean, we were planning on repackaging it anyway to save on the shipping weight. Let's just repackage it, continue repackaging it. Let's tell them that we repackaged it so we could inspect it to make sure it was good quality. And
save on freight costs. Not a lot, technically, the truth, right?
Yeah, it is.
We also took out all that Chinese documentation that weighed a bunch,
exactly.
All those papers.
Exactly. And he made sure that the people that we got to repackage it removed every single shred of Chinese documentation or Chinese markings from anywhere. So, and that's what got us in trouble, is that there are emails from him saying, oh, make sure that you remove all the Chinese documentation.
No. Smoking gun, no pun intended.
Yeah,
wow.
for real. It's the emails that always get you.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay, so you guys had won the contract. Tell me how you find out and what that moment is like, because there's got to be. It's like finding out you won the lottery.
Right. So I was just getting home. I remember this was in late January of 2007, and I had just gotten home. And I get a call from Efraim, and he's like, I've got good news and bad news. And I said, what's the bad news? And he's like, our first task order is only $600K. And I said, well, we won the contract. He's like, yeah, we won.
Oh, man.
He's like, get dressed. We're going out to celebrate. And so the what he meant by the task order, just to give you a little background, the way the contract was structured was it's a $300 million contract, but but that's estimated to be ordered over the course of 2 years.
Right. Okay.
And what they do is they give you like mini contracts under that contract, and they call that a task order. And legally, actually, according to the contract, they only were legally required to order the first task order. And we weren't informed what the size of that first task order would be. So obviously we bid the contract with the idea that they were going to order the full amount over the course of 2 years. And that's what, the logistics costs we put in and the way we negotiated with suppliers. If the government was going to drastically reduce the quantity, it would really screw us. We would not be able to deliver. And so when we saw that the first task order was only 600K, we're like, well, unless they order something additional, we're f***ed, because we can't deliver 600K worth of ammo at the prices we offered them. So it turned out that was just, their a way to just get the contract rolling. And a few weeks later, they gave us I think it was like a $30 million task order.
Sure. So that's like the Trader Joe's sample, where it's like you can have that little bite, just to make sure you like it. Yeah, they wanted to see the ammo and be like, is this real? Because did they audit? Were they like, oh, this is a legitimate company, not just dudes in their garage? Because they didn't know.
Yeah. So they actually gave us several audits before awarding the contract. Okay. So, which we'd never gotten before for any other contract. Even the $15 million contract, we didn't get this. But for this one, they actually asked Efraim to go meet them in person. That there's a scene of us in the movie. I think this was in the trailer, where we're stoned out of our minds and talking to the U.S. to the military contracting officers. It didn't happen like that in real life. I actually didn't even go to that meeting because Efraim wanted someone, because he was so young. He decided to take Ralph with him because Ralph is an older gentleman, so he felt that Ralph would give him more credibility. Sure. And so he took Ralph with him. And as far as I know, he didn't smoke weed before that, though that wouldn't surprise me either. I mean, he was doing drugs all day, regardless of the situation. So that wouldn't surprise me if he actually did that. But I mean, they gave us, so they wanted to meet him in person. They also sent a team of financial auditors down to our office, and they asked to see our accounting system to make sure we had a good accounting system to support this contract. And the funny thing was that what wasn't so funny at the time, we didn't actually have any accounting system. Efraim never kept any records whatsoever. He just did everything by the seat of his pants. So he had to hire a forensic accountant to come in and build the entire accounting record for his company for the past 2 or 3 years. I think 2 years. 2.5 at that point. And so they had to pretty much create this paper trail and make it look like it had always been there. And so,
oh my God, man.
Yeah. Wow, and that was
stress.
It took several weeks to do that. Several weeks to create an entire paper trail for that whole thing. And they had a whole accounting audit to make sure the accounting system was in place, which we put together at the last second. They also had an audit, a sources audit. They actually wanted to know where we were getting all the
good
stuff.
I'm glad to hear that, actually.
They
did a little bit more confidence.
Yeah, and they wanted us to list everyone we were getting it from. However, with that being said, there was nothing stopping us from changing our sources afterwards. So we were not legally required to use the sources that we told the government we were going to use. They just wanted to know that we had contacts with sources that had the capability of supplying this.
That's almost like a plausible deniability thing. They told us they were getting it from this South Korean arms company, and then they couldn't get it from there, so they went to this warlord in Albania. Right. Or whatever.
In their defense, there is some logic to it, because you don't want to limit your supplier's capabilities. If a new source, sources sometimes drop off. They end up selling it to somebody else before you, or someone, who you thought was a good connection in the government gets arrested for corruption. Surprise, surprise. So sources can dry up, and sometimes new sources arise, and you want to be able to have the flexibility to do that. So, with that in mind, they did not limit our capabilities of choosing our sources, but they did want to see that we had real sources that they believed could supply it lined up, and so that we had a real plan, that we weren't just blowing smoke and pretending and, you know, doing everything by the seat of our pants, even though we were doing about half of it by the seat of our pants.
Yeah, it sounds like, but it sounds like you were backstopping it a little bit. Some people might have questions about why the Albanian ammo is Chinese, so I'm going to do like a 2-second aside here, and feel free to jump in. But basically, Albania was crazy during the Cold War. So the dictator Enver Hoxha, and I'm probably butchering the name, he kind of just said, like, I don't trust the Soviets, but I'm certainly, you know, but I'm a communist, so I don't trust the West either. And I'm near Yugoslavia, which is kind of also in between the Soviets and the United States and playing both sides. So he was a paranoid, kooky dictator, and he built, I think, 800,000 bunkers all over the country. And so when you go to Albania today, there's still tons and tons and tons of these little gun turrets that stick out of the ground on farmland, near the highway, at every bridge, in the middle of towns. There'll be like a garbage-filled gun emplacement. 800,000 of them. Each one cost about as much as an apartment. They had a housing shortage. Surprise, surprise, right? So his thing was, when I get invaded by either the U.S. or the Soviet Union, I'm going to pull every man, woman, and child into one of these bunkers, and we're going to shoot them until there's nobody left. And so I'm going to stay in power. And
total war, he called it.
Total war, yeah. And so in order to get the ammo, this is a little hazy, but basically he just said, who's communist and isn't Russia and isn't, but of course no capitalist. Oh, China. Right. Let me get some help from China. And China was like, great, we have an ally that's not Tibet or somebody we've invaded.
And they gave them a foothold in the Mediterranean, you know, so they were thrilled to get the Albanians as their ally. And it was actually Mao, Chairman Mao, who made that alliance with the Albanians and supplied them with massive amounts of Chinese military equipment. That's why he even gave them whole factories that they were able to set up in Albania, which was actually, it came out in court later that how do you even know that this was made in China when the factories were shipped over to Albania and they could have made what looked like Chinese ammunition in Albania. So that became a matter of legal debate later on.
Interesting.
So there's not even really any way to prove that the ammunition was originally from China at all.
Really? That's so interesting. How much ammo was this again? The total amount?
So the AK-47 ammo was about 150 million rounds.
Oh my God. That is so much. Yeah. And how much fits in like one plane load or whatever?
If I recall correctly, it was about 2.7 million rounds was in a 45-ton IL-76. Yeah.
So you need, I'm not great at math, but you need 50 planes.
Yeah, just for the AK-47.
Just for that ammo. Wow. Yeah, and these are not like, these are massive freight planes.
Yeah, 45 tons each, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot of freight cost.
Yeah, it's about like 2 container loads, like one of those 40-foot containers that you see, on ships. Mm-hmm. Like it's like 2 tractor trailers about. Is 45 tons, a little more.
Okay.
So that would fit in one IL-76 aircraft. And we ended up delivering, before the contract was canceled, about 70, I believe it was 71 aircraft loads of ammunition.
Is this so there's one or more every single day is just landing?
Yeah, we were doing, I think, 3 to 4 a week at one point.
Oh my God. Yeah. And so repackaging it, that saved you guys a bunch of money, and somehow you ended up with a margin on each one of those.
Yeah, exactly. It actually saved us a lot of money. So the repackaging, I think we spent like $100,000 to get it repackaged, and that saved us around $3 or $4 million.
Oh yeah, that's a really good return then.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're getting the ammo through Heinrich or Henry. There's a part of me that's like, Ephraim didn't try to screw over Henry. Like, there's the one guy.
Oh no, he did.
Okay.
He did.
Well, all right then. And how did that go?
So not well, actually. Which actually was this that led eventually to the downfall of the contract.
Oh.
So what happened is that once we made the deal with the Albanians and with Henry, and we made the deal to repackage it, and things were starting to get repackaged and were starting to go and starting to get delivered. Of course, as Ephraim's natural tendency to be, he was looking for a way to squeeze more profit out of it. And so the guy who was doing the repackaging for us, Kosta Trebishka was his name. He owned, the reason Alex found him because he owned a cardboard box factory. He was in Albania, and so we were looking for massive amounts of cardboard boxes. So we found him to supply us the boxes, and then we're like, "Hey, you have a bunch of workers in your factory. Would you be willing to do this job for us?" And he agreed to do it, and so. Efraim went over to Albania to try to convince the Albanians to give us a better price. And the way he did it was before leaving, he tells me, he's like, "Hey, listen, I got to convince the Albanians to give us a better price. So the only way they're going to give us a better price is if they think that we have better options than them. So why don't you take all the quotes that we got from like the Kazakhstanis and from the Ukrainians and just, doctor those documents so it looks like the prices are much better than they are, that they're better than the Albanians." And I'm like, "Okay, that's what you want me to do. I'll do it." So I, edited some PDF documents, made it look real, and gave him copies of it. Alex told me, he met him at the airport. Alex goes with Efraim to meet Yili Pinari, who was the head of the export company in Albania, who was in charge of selling this ammunition. And Efraim shows him the papers, and Yili takes one look at it, and he's like, "That's all fake." He didn't even look at it. He's like, don't bother me with your fake documents.
Wow.
Yeah. And so Efraim was, begging and crying, saying, the freight, it's going to kill me. I can't do this. I can't deliver profitably. You need to do me a favor, so we could do more business in the future. Every excuse he could think of.
Sure.
And Pinari was like, "Look, you don't, you and I both know that this is the best deal that you can get. There's no one else in the market that's going to sell you ammo this cheap." And it was true, because Albania at the time was trying to join NATO. And one of the requirements NATO has is that they get rid of all their old Warsaw Pact ammunition. So the Albanians actually hired someone to start destroying the ammunition. They actually hired an American company to do this, and later, this is months after us, that turned into a huge political fiasco, tragic disaster. Actually, there was a huge explosion at the plant that they were disassembling this ammo, and it killed I forgot the exact number, but something like 30 people.
Oh God!
Like men, women, and children. Civilians from the surrounding town. It was an enormous explosion. So nothing to do with us. People think that has to do with us because it was Pinari and some of the other people who we were doing business with were also involved in this other contract. So the Albanians often they combine our stories. They think that we had something to do with that. I've gotten a lot of hate on YouTube for that reason, but it is what it is. Anyway, Efraim asked Costa, who was the box guy, if he had any connections with the Albanians to get him information about what the Albanians are actually getting paid for the ammo, right? And so Costa actually had some connections in the Ministry of Defense, and he found out that the Albanians were getting paid 2 cents a round for the AK-47 round ammo, and we were paying Henry 4 cents a round.
Oh, okay.
And so Ephraim lost his shit, right? Because he's like, "Henry's making so much money on us, that guy, he's screwing us. He's screwing us. And I told Efraim, I'm like, actually, I mean, we're making around the same amount of money as Henry is. We're making about 2 cents around too, more or less the same. I mean, the margin is different, but the total amount of money is the same. And, because we had to pay for air freight. And he's like, yeah, but it's our contract. Him. I want to make more money. I'm going to buy it directly from the Albanians. And that's when he flew to Albania and tried to do this deal directly with Pinari. And Pinari was like, he had him, he actually brought him into a meeting with another guy whose name was Deliorgi, who we found out later was part of the organized crime element of Albania.
Surprise,
he was like a mafia boss. Yeah. And as soon as Efraim enters the room. This is what Alex told me because he was there. As soon as Efraim enters the room with Dilly, Efraim is the kind of character, he's always talking shit, like no matter who it is. And I've seen him talk shit to some tough looking characters, we've gone out to clubs in Miami and he'll go up to this big buff guy and, grab the girl's hand who's with him, say, hey bro, I think she's better off with me. Stuff like things that are just insane that a normal person would just not do, and he's gotten to many fights that I've had to pull him out of. It was very annoying. It was very, very annoying to go out with him. It got to a point where I only went out with him because I felt almost obligated as part of our business relationship to do that, to keep him out of trouble.
Dead, we'll probably not be able to do any more deals.
Exactly.
Right.
But it was very, very frustrating to go out with him. Anyway, so he's a big talker. But the second he stepped into this office and Deliorgi was there, he got really quiet because he could tell right away that it was this building, this high rise that was still under construction, but they go through this this under construction dusty area. And suddenly they enter this office and it looks like a Wall Street boardroom. Super shady,
Yeah,
what's
this
this
office
doing
doesn't
here?
exist, but it's also well equipped.
Exactly, yeah, this. Definitely, there's movers and shakers here, and he gets into the office and suddenly Efraim, who's usually a big talker, suddenly is real quiet and doesn't say anything. And Deliorgi tells him, he's like, look, I hear you want a better price. And Ephraim's like, yeah, we need a better price. He's like, well, we can't give you a better price, but we know that you're hiring this other guy, this Costa Trebishka guy, to do the repackaging, and you're paying him money for this. So why don't you give us that contract to do the repackaging? We'll make some money on that. And then we give you a little better price on the ammo. So that way everybody wins, right? And Ephraim's like, yeah, Costa, here's, you got the contract. Let's do this. And Costa got stuck with $20,000 worth of cardboard boxes that now he had nothing to do with. And Costa called me up and he's like, hey, listen, I understand business is business, but can you at least make arrangements to buy these boxes? And I said, yeah, I'll talk to Efraim. I'll make sure that he buys these boxes. Yeah, we'll cover you. And I told Efraim, hey, make sure that you buy these boxes from Costa, so because and Ephraim's like, yeah, I'll take care of that. I'll take care of that. Of course, he never did anything. He just didn't give a shit. And that really pissed off Costa. And Costa, we found out later, decided to go to the New York Times and tell them what we were doing. Ooh. And he went to the FBI and told them what we were doing. And his biggest mistake was that he went to the Albanian press and told them what was happening. And that ended up getting him killed because because a few weeks later after that, he died in very mysterious circumstances in a car crash. When there was no other, he was driving down this road that was like a flat road in this open field. There was no other cars around, but somehow he crashed, I don't know into what, and he got thrown from the car 30 feet and he ended up dead.
Yeah, that's pretty sketchy.
Yeah. Oh, and so that unfortunately is what happened to Costa.
Well, I wonder why they killed him for that. Yeah. Probably because where the ammo came from was not supposed to be selling ammunition, right?
Well, no, what it was, the main issue was that he told the Albanian press that the Albanian politicians were getting kickbacks.
Oh yeah, and they gave the contract to the mob, these guys knew about. Yeah. Oh man, what a
so
yikes!
So he thought, because Albania, like many countries, like third world countries, they have like a big problem with corruption. It's one of their major problems. And so he said, hey, you know, there's this the government is selling this ammo. They're pocketing all the profits. The politicians are in league with the organized mob. They're going through this Swiss arms dealer. He told them everything, like he, you know, and then he ended up dead.
That's kind of sad, because he really like ended up dead because of because of you guys, in a way, because Efraim screwed him over.
Yeah, well, because Efraim screwed him over, and then he felt it was, I guess, his moral duty to blow the lid off this.
Yeah,
and,
I mean, he's still involved, so there's that, but it's also like, well, he wasn't going to die.
Yeah.
Yuck.
Yeah.
That sucks.
Yeah. And Henry was never cut out of the deal. I mean, when Efraim made that deal with the Albanians, they still had everything go through Henry. And I assume, I don't know why, I don't know for sure, but I assume it was because Henry was doing the payoffs to the various politicians, because that's how they managed to shield the money trail.
Yeah, and you know, other deals, you know, who knows? I mean, it's really hard to cut somebody like that out when they're better connected than you, because if someone's playing the long game, they see that it's not worth it. It's that they know they're going to play again. They need to not piss off that person, versus like some dude bro from Brooklyn or wherever you guys were based at the time.
Right. We're from Miami, but
Miami,
yeah. Efraim had a different philosophy than that. He felt everyone was expendable. And so the guy, so actually I got this story from Matt Cox. Matthew Cox was in prison with Efraim and became Ephraim's ghostwriter. So
that might have been who I was talking to
earlier. It must have been
Matt
Cox. So he was Ephraim's ghostwriter in prison. And he told me that when he was writing Ephraim's story and Efraim was telling him the whole story, he realized Efraim like screws pretty much everybody he's ever done business with, literally everybody he's done business with. And, Matt told me that he told him, he's like, I told him, Efraim, you can't keep on burning all your bridges, man. And Efraim said, there's a lot of bridges out there, bro.
Ooh, yeah, that's the complete opposite of how I do anything in my life. And most people who are successful. Yeah. That's very cringy and gross to hear. Yeah. Because it's like, I know, but I don't care. That's really what it's like, sociopathic sort of level of empathy.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Wow. Was shipping the ammo mostly smooth sailing, or is it like, now the Russians are stopping this, or this country's trying to not let it happen?
So in the beginning, it was a real challenge. Like, we didn't ship anything for the first 3 months. And because it was to ship ammo over internationally, it's a lot harder than shipping like just any random commodity, because you need a bunch of documentation. You need an end user certificate from the buyer, right? That's a document saying that this ammo is going to the government of Afghanistan, to the military of Afghanistan, and the military of Afghanistan promises not to re-export this to any other party without the supplier's permission. That's the first thing you need. And of course, in each document takes time, because every bureaucracy has to go through its procedures, and oftentimes various people hold things up, and it's always a headache. So you need to get your end user certificate, or EUC as they call it, and once you have your EUC, you take that, and then you get the export permit from the supplying country. And they have to go through their government and their procedures to get that. And once you have both of those documents, then you need to get a flyover permit for every country that if you're shipping this by air, for every country that the plane flies over, you need to get their permission to transport these goods over their airspace. And so, the flyover permits turned out to be a real nightmare to get for this, because we're flying over Central Asia, and a lot of those countries are very much aligned with Russia. And as we found out later, the Russians were pressuring them to not approve these permits because they wanted us to fail in supplying the U.S. Army. And it took several months, but eventually we got every flyover permit. So the way we would do it was when a country would not want to give us a flyover permit, what we would do is we would contact the military attaché, the U.S. military attaché within that government. And when the United States has an embassy in a country, they have a military attaché that's a representative of the U.S. armed forces in that embassy. And so we would contact that military attaché and say, hey, we're U.S. government contractors. We send them a copy of our contract so they see we're real. And we need your help in convincing this government to give us a flyover permit. And then that military attaché would apply diplomatic pressure as they were able to within that country to make them approve this permit. And that worked for almost all the countries that we worked on, except for Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan just refused to give us a flyover permit, and no matter how much pressure we tried to exert. And then I had the idea, I told Efraim, well, what if we hire the Uzbekistani national airline to do the shipping? and he was like, yeah, that's a great idea. And so we asked them for a quote, and they actually gave us a quote, and it was actually relatively reasonable. It wasn't even outrageous. And suddenly our flyover permit was granted.
Right. It's like, we would love to hire you, but there's just one problem. One of the wealthiest men in Uzbekistan who owns this airline. We can't seem to get flyover permits. Do you know anything about that? And he's like, let me make one quick phone call and solve this whole problem. Oh my gosh.
Once they had some, they had to have some motivation. Exactly. Some skin in the game.
That's impressive. Look, my question was, how do you even start the process of figuring out how to talk to who to talk to the person that's going to give you this permission? And this kind of knowledge is so specialized that it's no wonder there are riches in these little tiny niches where it's like, okay, I can get ammo from this place, from this other place, over these places. And it's just like, well, that's where the cash is, because it's a huge pain in the ass. You need a ton of connections, and you can't just hire some one-stop shop that's going to be able to do this. It doesn't exist.
Yeah. I mean, you learn as you go. I mean, that's like any business. Every business has its quirks, and I think that a lot of people stay out of the arms business because there are hazards, both moral, business, and possibly physical at times, and definitely political. So the hazards are significantly more than just basic commodity businesses. I hear you. I mean, more of a niche business.
I would never go to these countries. I used to look. I've been in North Korea. I've been to Albania. It was at the time the poorest country in Europe. Now I think it's Moldova. But these are not places where when you're 40 and you have kids, you want to just be schlepping into. And it's like, who are you going to meet? This gangster, this corrupt politician, this arms dealer. We're all going to meet in a warehouse in the middle of nowhere and inspect this product. What? No way. It's a bad idea. Even if they're like, no, we're just going to do business. It's just you're going to draw the short straw at some point.
Right.
You're going to meet an Efraim.
Yeah. Except for Henry, he manages to skate by somehow. Nothing seems to touch him.
But again, he's a broker. He's probably like, I'm not inspecting the product. I'll meet you at the Four Seasons in Geneva.
Right.
I'm not going there. Right. You're coming here. I'll get you a visa. Right.
No, Henry would be on the ground.
Really?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, to inspect the product. I don't know about the delivery aspect, but he has been on the ground in the sources to be there. So, he gets his hands dirty.
Yikes. Yeah. That's a guy I'd love to talk to, although he would never tell me anything.
No, he wouldn't.
All the most interesting people are the ones who are like, I don't know what you're talking about, Jordan. No, we are merely an importer-exporter of textiles. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, if he told you everything, it'd ruin his business. So
sure.
Maybe once he retires, if he ever does that.
Yeah. No. Of course. This is probably a ridiculous question. It feels like one, but is this stuff insured? Because it's 3 loads per week. What happens if some of it goes bad or isn't working or the plane doesn't make it? I mean, it seems like you should have that, but can you even insure that?
I think there might be insurance that you could buy, but it would be extremely expensive. And I know that at least as far as we were concerned, we did not insure anything.
Okay. I figured. I was just curious because it's like, it's such a weird thing. Now, This all seems like a really fun and interesting business, and there's a lot of wheeling and dealing, which I would have loved in my 20s. I'm way too old for this kind of stuff right now. I don't know about you.
Same. Yeah, no, I'm out of that business with no intentions of going back.
I do picture you guys walking around with silk suits and metal briefcases and sunglasses. Just the straight up Nicolas Cage circa 1996 aesthetic, period.
That's exactly what we did. It wasn't silk; it was regular suits.
Yeah,
but
linen,
but we did have some, like those cool shades and metal briefcases.
Yeah.
Because we specifically tried to look like Nicolas Cage, because that's who we were basing our look on. We wanted people to take us seriously, you know.
Yeah.
Which, you know, maybe that wasn't the way to go. But
at the time, it works, though, right? Because everyone's like, oh, that guy, he looks like an arms dealer. All right, fine.
It was more, I think it was more than anything, it was that we always carried documentation proving that we had active contracts. And once you show them that, then they're like, okay, I mean, regardless of how young these guys look, they actually they're doing business. So you want to do business with them or not.
How did you start to smell that Efraim was going to screw you over?
Well, after the logistics issues were taken care of, and we started delivering on a regular basis, 3-4 aircraft a week, started going into Afghanistan, and I had more or less taken care of all the issues, and the only things I really needed to do was more or less just like babysit the logistics companies and make sure that the receiving contracting officer in Afghanistan signed off on the documents. So my workload went way down because I had already set everything up. And I stopped coming into the office as much because I didn't have to, and to do my job. And he started complaining, and he's like, hey, he goes to me. I remember I was staying at the office late one night where everyone else had left. I still had some stuff I had to do. And Efraim comes into my office and he says, hey, a lot of the guys around the office are complaining that you're not pulling your weight. At this point, we had about like 15 people working for us. We had started just us two, but like after we won the $300 million contract, he decided to spend $2,000 a month on an office. That was when we actually moved out of his apartment.
Like a WeWork selling AK-47s and missiles.
Yeah, pretty much. So he comes into my office and he's like, a lot of the guys around the office are like, saying that you're not pulling your weight around here. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What guys are saying that? Because I'm doing what I need to do. And, I don't know what you're talking about. He's like, yeah, because you're not coming into the office that much. I'm like, well, I'm taking care of what I need to do, right? My job is to babysit the Afghan contract, and that's what I'm doing, and things are smooth. So what's the problem? And he's like, yeah, but you're not like helping out with our other contracts that we're going for. And I said, well, first of all, I told you not to go for those contracts, because he was like chasing literally every thing. He was chasing, $2 million contracts, $500,000 contract. I'm like, dude, why are you wasting your time with that? We got a $300 million contract. Let's concentrate on delivering this successfully and, pulling as much profit that we can out of this. And then that's going to make us the vast majority of the money. We're more than, getting distracted, by going after a whole bunch of tiny contracts that we might not even win. But he was like, hey man, we're on a roll. Everything's money. I'm going for it all. So you take care of the Afghan contract. You leave the rest to me. I'm like, okay. I mean, that's what you want to do. So he started chasing all these other contracts, and, a lot of them, as these things tend to do, got to be a bit of a logistical headache, and he's running around like crazy, screaming at everyone in the office, to do this, that, and the other. And I'm like, listen, we have a deal by deal basis. I'm not responsible for, I'm responsible for the deals I work on. That's what I'm getting paid on. So if you decide to do other contracts, I'm not getting paid on that. Why should I work on that? And he's like, yeah, but like if the company, goes bankrupt, then the Afghan contract gets destroyed too. So you got to make sure that the company is taken care of. And I said, well, in that case, are you willing to give me percentage of the company instead of just the contracts I work on. And he's like, oh, come on. Don't be ridiculous.
I want you to work for free.
Anyone. Yeah, that's exactly it. He wanted me to work for free. And I said, well, in that case, if you don't give me a piece of the company, then I'm not going to do it. And he's like, well, how about this? I'll give you 1% of the company.
Instead of the massive amount you're going to get from the $300 million.
And I was like, well, I'm like, well, we have a deal as for the Afghan contract. I was supposed to get 25% of the profit initially. So I was like, well, I would, the 95% of the money that the company's going to make is going to come from the Afghan contract. So I think I'll just stick with our deal on the Afghan contract rather than go into 1% of the company.
Yeah, for all the headaches.
And yeah, exactly. And he's like, well, that's my offer. Take it or leave it. And I said, are you not going to pay me what we agreed on in the Afghan contract? And he's like, you're in breach of contract. You're not doing your job. I'm like, no, I am not in breach of contract. I'm doing my job. And if you're not going to pay me what you agreed on, I'll see you in court. Wow. And so then I left, and that was the end of that. And I sued him. And we were about to get into it, 2 months later, I was getting my lawyer all, lined up and everything. And 2 months later, the feds raided his office. And I got a call. I was already, long gone by that point, 2 months out of the company. But the one of the secretaries in the office called me up, and she's like, hey, because I was on good terms with everybody.
Sure.
I was considered the nice guy, and he was the asshole.
Right.
So when people would have problems with him, they would come to me and complain about him, so I remained on good terms with them. I'm still good friends with some of the people I worked with back then. So one of the secretaries calls me up, and she's like, hey, I just want you to know that the feds just raided the office.
Oh,
and
God.
They're gathering up they told us all to step away from our computers, and they told us to leave, and they're gathering up everyone's computer, and they're packing up all the files, all the filing cabinets, and they're taking it all. And I'm like, oh shit, we're mm-hmm. And so I called up Alex, who was still in Albania. He was still supervising the repackaging job in Albania. And I told him what happened. I'm like, hey, just FYI, the feds just raided Efraim's office. And so Alex calls up Efraim, and Efraim, a new guy named Danny answers the phone. Danny is the guy that Efraim replaced me with once I left. He ended up screwing Danny over too.
Oh, I'm so surprised to hear that.
Yeah. And he ended up screwing the guy he replaced Danny with as well. I mean, it's just like a never-ending succession of people that he promises the world to and then screws over. So, but I just heard that he just recently got into some big lawsuit with somebody. So he's still doing the same thing. He's the same guy. So Danny answers the phone, and Alex is like, Alex wanted to feel him out, see what was going on. And so Alex is like, hey, Danny, I need some of documents, for the shipment that's coming in today, that's going to be leaving today to Afghanistan. I need these and these documents. Can you send them over to me? And Alex told me that he hears Danny cover the phone, the mouthpiece of the phone, and he still can hear Danny talking. And he's like telling Efraim, hey, it's Alex. He says he needs this documents. What should I tell him? And he hears Efraim saying, don't tell him anything. Just tell him that there was a bomb threat. Yeah, there's a bomb threat. And so we had to leave the office, and so we can't get the documents. But as soon as, they clear things up, we'll get it to him right away. So don't worry about anything. And so Danny gets on the phone and repeats exactly what Efraim told him, and Alex is thinking, why are they lying to me?
Yeah, why are they lying to him? Who cares? I mean, just hey, we got raided. It's not good, but we're gonna we'll figure it out.
So in Alex's mind, I don't know the real reason, but in Alex's mind, Alex is thinking, well, maybe Efraim is thinking that he's going to throw him under the bus.
Oh yeah, good point.
And he's going to blame, Efraim is going to claim he had no idea about the Chinese ammo. This was all Alex's idea. Alex was the guy who was supervising everything. Alex is the only one who knew about the Chinese ammo, and it's all Alex's fault. And, and Efraim was totally innocent. And so that's what Alex is thinking. And Alex is like, there's no way I'm going down for this. Alex wasn't even getting paid he was getting paid a straight salary. He wasn't getting a commission or anything. He was getting paid a straight salary, and it wasn't even a particularly high salary. So Alex is like, you know what? This is not worth it. I'm out of here. And he's on the next flight home. And so Alex and I both hire lawyers, and our lawyers, the first thing they tell us is, go look through your emails and look for the keywords of what you're worried about.
Right. Make sure there's no evidence in there, like smoking gun emails saying cover up all the Chinese documents. Yeah,
exactly. Well, they're like, well, if there is smoking gun evidence, we should know about it.
Yeah.
So why don't you gather all the things that you think could be damaging and send it over? And so we both look through our emails and we realize how much smoking gun there is. And we were not careful at all, unfortunately. I mean, I think in the beginning, Efraim was like, hey, we should only talk by phone, but then after like a few days, we were also frazzled, and it like, we were all on different time zones. So we had to, get very, very time sensitive information to people who might be asleep, and we were super tired. So eventually someone just started, writing, hey, do this, and make sure you repackage the album, make sure there's no Chinese documentation. And that came out there, and we were all copied on these emails. Oh, so there was literally, rock solid evidence of that we were aware of the whole situation at the time. And so our lawyers said, hey, this evidence is pretty strong against you. It's not like Efraim is going to pay for your legal defense. So if you're going to fight them in court, you're going to need, do you have like a few $100K? Because that's what you're going to need. And I didn't have a few $100K because Efraim didn't give me a penny. And Alex sure didn't have a few $100K. He wasn't getting paid very much. So really our only option was to cooperate. And the government told us that they're like, hey, if you guys cooperate, we don't think that you're not really a target. So we're not even going to charge you. We're really just going for Efraim. And, we're like, great, because, he tried to screw us over. So we owe him nothing. We're not making any money off this whole thing. So why should we go down for it? And then 6 months go by, and nothing happens. And we're like, okay, well, maybe they decided not to pursue this case, because they don't always bring charges with every investigation they do. And about 6 months later, I think it was in February, it was March. It was March. I remember it was March 27th. 15 years ago and 2 days ago, the New York Times published this front page article about us. And it had it had both mine and Ephraim's mug shots on the front page. We did not look good. And it was right next to a big picture of rusty looking ammunition. And the New York Times said that we were delivering low quality, defective ammunition to the Afghanis, and we were putting all the soldiers in danger. And, and that this was all George Bush's fault because he hired these two stoner idiots to do this $300 million contract. And so that was like the whole narrative. And the reason they got that picture on the front cover was because Efraim had bought, I think it was 30,000 rounds of Bulgarian. It wasn't even the Chinese stuff. It was Bulgarian ammo. He had bought it sight unseen because he had gotten like a super, super good deal, like even better than the Albanian deal. It was like literally like, I think like maybe 20% the cost of the Albanian ammo.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so it was super cheap, practically free. But he didn't have, it was a small quantity, like very small, like 30,000 rounds and 2.7 million rounds fit in an aircraft. So that, it was something that we were already shipping grenades from Bulgaria. So we figured, buy these rounds if we didn't have time to inspect it.
Yeah.
If it's good, we'll make some money on it, good margins. If it's bad, the government will just reject it. And, it's not such a big loss because it was so cheap and we had room on the plane anyway. So Efraim decided to go for that. And when it got to Afghanistan, the government inspected it and it turned out to be total shit. And they rejected it. And they're like, we're not paying you for this. We're not giving this to any soldiers. And so the U.S. Army had nowhere to put that 30,000 rounds. So they just put it to the side of the airport runway where they had unloaded it, and they just left it there. And so when the
and that's the photo the New York Times takes of this rusty, moldy, out in the weather for months at a time, even though it's already 20 years old or 40 years old ammunition.
Exactly.
Oh, man.
Exactly. So that's the ammo that the New York Times saw, because all the other ammo was already issued to the troops. And it wasn't, I don't think they went very deep into Afghanistan, probably not a safe thing to do. So they just asked the local people, hey, can you show us some of the stuff that AUI has delivered? And they're like, yeah, that's some of the stuff they delivered. Yeah. And so they took pictures of that and they extrapolated and said, oh, this is some of the stuff that they delivered, implying that this is all the stuff that we're delivering. And so that became a huge political scandal. And there were hearings in Congress. You can look this up on YouTube. There's like I think it was Henry Waxman, who was like one of the lead congressional people at the time, like is talking about us on the floor of Congress. And they said that they wanted us, Congress contacted us and said that they wanted us to testify in front of Congress. And our lawyers said, well, if you make them testify, they're just going to plead the fifth because they're under criminal investigation. So Congress said, well, on second thought, we're not going to bother with that. So we didn't end up testifying in front of Congress. And the U.S. Army was like, whoa, we had no idea about any of this. We're taking the contract away, even though it came out later in court that they were informed by the Justice Department, who were doing the investigation. As soon as they raided the office, the Justice Department found handwritten notes on Diveroli's desk. One of the to-do items was repackaged Chinese ammo. So that kind of tipped them off. And the Justice Department knew what was going on, and they told the Army that this came out in court later. They sent the Army an email saying, hey, this ammo is Chinese. It may be illegal. You should probably stop taking delivery on this.
But they needed it.
Said, the Army said, well, this is mission critical supplies, and we're going to continue taking delivery on it unless we get a letter from the Attorney General of the United States requesting that we stop taking delivery on it. And the Attorney General never sent that letter. Why they never sent the letter, I don't know. Maybe they made the political calculation that, hey, as long as there isn't a political stink about this, let's just keep it quiet and continue taking delivery. Maybe they didn't care. I don't know. But they only started caring once the New York Times published that article, and suddenly the Army pretended like they were shocked and appalled,
right?
And that they had no idea the whole time, and then they immediately canceled the contract with AEY, and they put it out for open bid. And then the Justice Department brought charges against us right after that, like a week later. So I don't even think.
Nothing like a good public humiliation to get the government to take action. And by the way, this is when people crap on journalists, this is why good journalism is so important, by the way. It's not the focus of this conversation, but it's like the only thing keeping a lot of this stuff in check is articles like that. Even though the photo was a little disingenuous, at the end of the day, this would be the least of this kind of deal would be the least of our concerns if people weren't worried about getting exposed, right? I mean, you see that in countries with no free media. It's just a mess.
That's very true. That's very true. No, I fully support free journalism and the freedom of the press and freedom of speech. I do wish that journalists would be less disingenuous.
Yeah, that's the internet, man. Click farm crap.
Yeah, because it's it obviously did a lot of harm to us. Not that we were totally innocent or anything like that, but it definitely skewed the story. And once one publication publishes something, none of the other journalists bother to check whether it's true or not.
Yeah, it's already.
They're just like, oh, as reported in the New York Times, this and this happened, and it's the gospel truth from then on. No matter, even if there's counter evidence to it.
So what do they charge you with? Just that one specific act of fraud, which was repackaging the ammunition? Is that it?
So the way they work is, and this is kind of speaks to how the justice system works in the United States, was they said to us, first they had told us they weren't going to charge us with anything, right? And when we initially agreed to cooperate, they're like, oh, you're cooperating, you're not even a target, we're not going to even charge you. But then once it got into the newspapers, they're like, oh, we need to charge you because you're too closely associated with the actual acts of that we're charging Diveroli with, so we can't just let you go and charge him only. We're like, okay. And they're like, look, these are your options. We can, the initial thing that they charged us with was, they said, you delivered 71 aircraft loads of this Chinese ammunition. And each aircraft load had a document, right, that stated what was in the
I know where this is going.
Aircraft, right? So like it states what you are, what the type of ammunition is in the aircraft, the quantity of the ammunition, the year it was manufactured, and the place of origin. And under place of origin, you guys put Albania. And you knew that the real place of origin was China. And not only did you put this false information on the document, you actively covered it up. You had a whole repackaging operation to hide the fact that it was Chinese origin. And then you lied on the documents. So each time you lied on this document and you submitted it to the government, and Efraim signed the document, but I'm the one who was submitting it all to the government, so I was liable. You submitted a document that you knew was false to the government, and each one of these documents is an act of fraud.
That's terrifying.
And you did this 71 times. So we're going to charge you with 71 acts of fraud, and each of these acts of fraud could get you 5 years in prison. So you can get 355 years in prison, or you can plead guilty, and they use their discretion as prosecutors to combine those 71 acts into one. They have that option somehow.
I'm scared for you right now, even though I already know the outcome is different, because you had kids at this point, right? Which makes it 100 times scarier.
My daughter had just been born. She was actually born like a month after that we won the contract.
My God. Oh, man.
So
and
my daughter was 1 year old at the time. And so they're like, if you plead guilty, then we'll combine it to one act, so you can get maximum 5 years. And because you plead guilty, we'll tell the judge, it's not up to us what sentence you get, but the judge, we'll tell the judge who's going to give you the sentence that you should get on the low end of the range. So maximum you could get legally is 5 years, if we're going to recommend the judge gives you 1 year or even less. Who knows? Maybe you'll only get probation. So let me think about that. I could. Get probation or 355 years in prison. And even if I do win the case, if I fight them in court, I need a few $100,000 to fight to even have a fighting chance, because, if you use a public defender, or as the private lawyers love calling them, a public pretender, right?
Yeah, that's not fair. The public defenders are usually better than these private lawyers, but whatever.
So what the private lawyers will tell you is, well, not to shit on public defenders.
Yeah, they're busy.
With the private lawyers, yeah, exactly. And this is another issue with the system. The public defenders often have 100 to 200 cases they're working on at any one time. The prosecutors have 5 or 10. So the level of distraction and focus between the prosecutor side and the public defenders, it's just not equal, right? You're lucky if your public defender even knows your name, let alone the details of your case. How's he going to remember all that?
That's true. Skill-wise, though, it's not fair to say public defenders don't know what they're doing. They're way more experienced a lot of the time than the other guys. But yeah, the level of focus that you're going to get. I mean, do you get better service in first class on an airplane, or in economy? It's not because the flight attendant in first class knows the job better, right?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I'm not saying that the public defenders don't have their hearts in the right place and aren't skilled. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying that the system is stacked against them.
It's true. I just like to stand up for those types of attorneys because they're way more idealistic and frankly,
I think you have to be.
Like I went to law school with a bunch of those people, and they were the best people in law school. The a-holes like me became podcasters or went into private practice.
Right. I completely believe it. I think you have to be idealistic to be a public defender. But from a defendant's point of view, look, you
get more attention.
The chance of going to prison for 355 years, I wouldn't feel comfortable being case 199 on a public defender's caseload. And if I wanted to get a private defender, then it costs $200,000 to $300,000, which I didn't have. So it wasn't really much of a choice. Even if I had the money, I probably would have made the same choice.
I think
I didn't have the money.
Yeah.
So I didn't have the money, so I didn't even really have a choice. But of course, I pled guilty, and eventually Efraim pled guilty as well. And Alex pled guilty as well, and Ralph pled guilty. Ralph didn't plead guilty, actually. He went to court and he ended up losing. So Ralph got sentenced to 4 years. Because he fought them. At least it wasn't 355 years.
Yeah.
But he spent every penny he had, he spent defending himself in court. I think he spent like $1 million plus.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. And I got very, very lucky. I went back to school. I started working at a nonprofit. I, tried to make myself look as good as possible.
I was going to say, good move, man. What are you doing now, sir? Are you still in the arms business? Actually, I work at an orphanage for no money, and I go.
It was actually a food bank.
Yeah,
yes,
it was a food bank. I wasn't even that far up. Yeah. It's like I go to church every day, even though I'm Jewish, and I go to synagogue, and also, like I sweep the streets outside the school as a hobby.
Yeah. When you have that kind of, when you have years of prison hanging over your head, you're going to do anything that you think even gives you a slight chance. So, I told myself there's no way I'm going to miss out years of my daughter's life.
No, not worth it.
For this. It's exactly.
For Efraim Diveroli of all people.
Exactly.
No, thank you. So how did they catch Efraim, man? I mean, he doesn't seem like a guy who learns from his mistakes. So I assume he's just like busy selling rockets and missiles and guns.
Yeah. So Efraim probably, if I had to guess, he probably would have gotten maybe a year in prison just because he was the ringleader, but he pled guilty. So they also reduced his counts down to 1, just like mine. But when he signed his plea agreement, the way it works, you plead guilty, you sign a plea agreement admitting to all your crimes, and you promise not to do any more crimes. And the government the prosecutors promise to give a positive recommendation to the judge saying this guy's been cooperative and he feels really bad and he's a changed person. He'll be a good citizen from now on. So, go easy on him, judge. But part of that agreement is you can't commit any more crimes before you're sentenced, because if you commit more crimes, the judge isn't gonna. They can't tell the judge, "Hey,
I
go
know
easy on him."
Efraim got 4 years. Yeah. So what other crimes did this moron frickin' commit after he pleads? This is like Billy McFarland from Firefest. Like, hey man, just stay out of trouble for 1 second. Cool, I'm gonna go scam people with fake Met Ball tickets. Be right back.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty much, it is pretty entertaining, at least for me. I'm sure not for Efraim. But so what happened was they told him to stay out of the arms business while he was awaiting sentencing. But of course he couldn't do that. He kept on, he created some shell companies being run by like one of his new employees that he, promised the world to, who he replaced Danny with. but of course he's a control freak, so he couldn't let his employees do all the talking. So when it got down to it, he was trying to sell these magazines, these high capacity magazines, to some gun dealer in Central Florida in the Orlando area. And when it got real close to making this deal, Efraim wanted to negotiate, and so he insisted that his employee put him on the phone as a consultant, right? And he gets on the phone, and the guy he's talking to, who's a gun dealer in Central Florida, realizes who he is, and he Googles him, and he realizes, hey, this guy is in a lot of trouble right now. What if I assume this is what he was thinking. I don't know for sure, but I assume he was thinking, what if he's trying to entrap me into doing something illegal, in order to get his own sentence reduced.
That's a reasonable assumption, actually.
Yeah, a very, very reasonable assumption. This is pretty much how these things work. And so he calls up, so he's nervous, and he calls up the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms Administration.
Wouldn't be my first call, but okay. I'd just be like, click. I don't know if I'd go to the feds, but whatever.
Well, I mean, the ATF are the people who are responsible for licensing gun dealers. Mm-hmm. So, he wants to maintain his license and be in good standing.
So he's probably
not get in trouble.
Look how good of a dealer I am. I'm proactive.
Exactly. Like I'm being, clean cut here.
Yeah.
I don't want to get in any trouble. I want to make sure I'm not breaking any laws or regulations. So advise me what to do on this, ATF. And the ATF is like, oh, that's so interesting that this guy wants to do business with you. Why don't you keep on talking to him? And why don't you introduce one of our undercover agents as your partner? And so the undercover agent gets on the phone with him, and he says to Efraim, I'd love to do this deal with you, but I really, I'm the kind of guy who really has to meet someone in person and shake their hand and look them in the eye before I could do a deal.
Okay.
So why don't you come up to Orlando and we'll shake on it and do this deal? And Ephraim's like, yeah, I totally understand. I'm that kind of guy too, so sure, I'll be up there, in this weekend, we'll shake on it and, do this deal. And so Efraim goes up to Orlando, which breaks the conditions of his
probation,
bond.
Yeah,
right?
or his
exactly.
bail or whatever.
His bond, his bail, exactly. And he's out on bond. He's out on bail, and he was not allowed to leave the Miami-Dade County, and so he goes to Orlando, which breaks the conditions, and he meets this undercover ATF agent. And the agent tells him, hey, I just picked up this cool new HK handgun. It's the newest thing on the market. Check this out. And Ephraim's like, oh, I heard about that. That's so cool. I've been wanting to try those out. Hey, give me that. Let's go to a range. Let's go shooting. And he picks up the ATF hands him the gun. And he's like, let's go shooting. And then and then he tells the ATF agent, he's like, what can I say? Once a gun runner, always a gun runner. Am I right? And then right after that, the ATF agent slaps cuffs on him and he says, you're under arrest. You're a felon in possession of a firearm.
Oh, wow.
Which is because he had already pled guilty, which makes him officially a felon. And if you're a felon, if you're in possession of a firearm, you can get up to 10 years in prison. So they arrested him. And they told the judge, hey, this guy's a flight risk because he already didn't respect the conditions of the bail he's on. So why should we give him bail for this? And the judge agreed. And so they kept him in county jail, actually, in Central Florida for a year. While Ralph's trial was getting worked out. And eventually, I think after a year, he got sentenced. And he hired the best lawyers in Miami. He spent, I heard from somebody, spent $2 million on his lawyers over the course of
oh my God,
years.
That's insane.
Yeah. I mean, these guys are expensive. I mean, Roy Black's firm, he's one of the most famous lawyers in Miami. I think he doesn't even talk to you unless you put down $1 million retainer.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, for real. That's for real. That's a real thing. And so he got best lawyers in Miami. I mean, he could have gotten 15 years total, 5 for the fraud charge and 10 for the gun charge. But he his lawyers convinced the judge to give him a combined sentence of 4 years. So,
man, but it's so classic, right? Like, he can't help screwing people over, screws over the guy, gets the New York Times piece written. That's what exposes everything, gets him in trouble. Hey, you can't do this. Well, nobody's going to tell me what to do. There's no consequences that I'm going to ever face. And it's just like Shakespearean in that the gun is also his undoing at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
it's straight out of a movie. The whole once a gunrunner, always, it's just like, he's got his movie Hollywood line right at that critical point. It's like almost made for the screen.
Yeah. It's like watching Blow with Johnny Depp, where they're like, man, I feel so bad. We have to arrest this guy. And he's like, where's my knife? Right. It's like the same thing. Unfreaking believable. Man, do you think if you'd made all that money in that deal, that you would have actually quit being a arms dealer, or would you just keep going? I mean, on Wall Street, we say golden handcuffs. You're like, I'm done after this. And then you're like, except I've got this sweet boat and this house in Nantucket, and my wife likes sending the kids to the super expensive private schools. Maybe I'll work for a few more years. I mean, you're not going to quit if you made 50 million, 15, 20, whatever million on a deal. You're not going to.
I would have to agree with you. I mean, my plan was always to quit. My plan was to make... my plan was 5 to 10 million. That was my number. Like, I thought above 5 million, I'm probably set for life as long as I don't spend ridiculous money. And, 10 million, I'll be really set. And I could, maybe use $500,000 and jumpstart a music career. That was my dream. Because I'm a musician, I play guitar, I'm a singer, I write songs, and I realized that you need money to have any sort of promotion and to get out there. And so my dream was I was going to make a few $1,000,000 and use some of that money to jumpstart a music career. But in reality, when I think about it, I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, if I had made $10 million and I had $50 million coming, if I just stuck out one more year, would I really not stick out one more year and make another 50 million?
Yeah.
And then once you make that 50 million, are you going to not stick another year and make another 100 million? It's just like, it never ends. So I have to say that in retrospect, I'm actually really happy with how things ended up going, that I had a real kick in the ass.
Yeah.
And it really, really showed me what was important in life and set me on a much better path, which I'm much happier on now.
Do you mind if I ask how much you actually made as an arms dealer?
It's embarrassing to say.
Good. Then people won't do it. Come on. That's the point. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would have made a lot if I hadn't been screwed over, but in the end, I actually only pulled out, and this is so embarrassing to say, but I only pulled out about $30,000.
Oh my God. You would have been better off working at Chipotle or something like that.
I would have. And the reason for that was, it wasn't that I didn't make any money. It was that Efraim insisted on rolling the money I made into the next deal. Mm-hmm. So he was like, hey, I'm using my money to fund this. So why don't, you're making money on this contract. So why don't we use some of your money to fund this? So he never let me pull the money out, which should have been an obvious clue that he never really intended to pay me. But he kept on rolling the money into the next deal, into the next deal, into the next deal. So by the time that he ended up screwing me, that was like all my money.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, I wouldn't even be that embarrassed about it. You were literally like a kid. And also you were being taken advantage of by somebody who manipulated the governments of multiple countries. It's not like it was hardly you getting fleeced when you should know better. 2020 hindsight, of course, like, oh, he wanted me to do this. That was the first red flag. I don't know, man. I wouldn't be so hard on yourself. If you are.
I mean, I'm over it. I've 15 years will do that.
Yeah, of course. Look, what are you doing now? Because actually, I want to know what you're doing now and if any arms dealer skills overlap with it. But also, I think what you're doing now is awesome, and I want one.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's an interesting story of how I got into my current business. Well, I'll give you the slightly longer version because I know what you're talking about,
Yeah.
which I'll get to. But the first so what happened was the way I got into my current business is I was this actually led directly from the whole War Dog story. I was under house arrest doing I got 7 months of house arrest, which is a breeze. I mean, I have no complaints about that.
Gosh, even now in the days,
yeah.
I'm basically under house arrest right now. I got 2 little kids and DoorDash.
Exactly.
I'm fine. That's fine. Sign me up.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a million times better than prison.
Sure.
That's for sure. So I was under house arrest, but I was, pretty bored. I had the whole ankle tracking thing.
Oh, really?
And
okay. You shower with that thing on and everything, or is it, wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
No, it's like made out of rubber and plastic, and they put it on so that you can't remove it. And they have like a metal wire around the band, so if you cut it, it sends an alert signal to to your parole officer.
I would imagine getting that off is such a psychological relief.
Oh, it was so nice.
Yeah.
It was really nice. After 7 months,
yeah,
it was really nice. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, if I left my apartment, like it would like start beeping, and my parole officer would give me a call and start yelling at me, like, what are you doing out of your house? So, so I was staying home for 7 months, and I was playing a lot of guitar. And I really missed playing with a drummer because the drums give the music the energy. You dance to a beat, right? Mm-hmm. But I obviously couldn't go to the studio because I couldn't leave my house, and no drummer was.
I'm under house arrest. I can't make the meeting.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's a valid excuse.
Yeah. And of course, no drummer. I had a few friends who were drummers, but they weren't going to like pack up their entire drum set into a van and bring it over my apartment. And there's barely any room in my apartment at the time for a drum set. And even if we did, it would wake up the entire neighborhood. So it wasn't exactly something I could do. So I bought a drum machine, which is like, for those who don't know, it's like an electronic device that is a tabletop thing. It has a bunch of buttons. Each button makes a different drum sound. You could tap the buttons to make a beat, and it plays it over and over in a loop. And then, so I'd make beats and I'd play my guitar to it. But you could make different beats on it. But every time I wanted to change the beat on the drum machine, like when you go from like verse to chorus, the beat changes. I'd have to stop playing my guitar, press a button on the machine, and go back to playing my guitar.
Super lame.
It interrupted the flow of the music. So I thought, man, I really need like a hands-free drum machine, a drum machine in the form of a guitar pedal, like, something I could tap with my foot. Guitar pedals are a common device that guitarists use to create effects on their guitars. So like, like when you change the sound of a guitar from like clean to distorted, it's most of the time you're hitting a guitar pedal and it changes the sound. So I thought I need to combine a drum machine and a guitar pedal. And I went online to look for it, and I couldn't find anything. I asked my musician friends, and they're like, never seen anything like that, but if you find it, let me know, because I want one too. That sounds super cool. And so I thought, if nobody's making it, everybody wants it. This is going to be my ticket to redemption here.
Sure.
And so it took me 3 years, but eventually I got a working prototype, and it's called the Beat Buddy. That's this little poster that's been behind me the whole time. This thing is, as Gizmodo says, a genius idea.
Yeah.
I love that line.
I mean, yeah, you can dine out on that one.
Yeah, exactly. And here it is in person. It's a pedal that you could press with your foot. It goes on the floor, and when you press it, I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, that's
camera.
Cool.
Yeah. It, like, you see it moves according to the beat, and when you tap it, it does like a drum fill. If you hold down the pedal, it does a transition. When you let go, it goes to the next part. So you can go from like verse to chorus back to different parts. And you could also plug in, it also has a thing, you could plug in more buttons to have more capabilities.
Oh, very cool. Like MIDI control and whatnot.
Exactly. Yeah. It's got full MIDI control. So that was my first product. Came out in 2014. and it became a very big success in the musical world. I've had some of my musical idols ended up buying it.
Really? That's friggin' cool. That must have felt great.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was actually, so one of my favorite bands that I grew up learning to play guitar was Alice in Chains.
Oh, I love Alice in Chains too, man.
Love
Definitely.
Alice in Chains.
Yeah. People are going to be like, what? Jordan likes Alice in Chains. Yeah, it's going to surprise a lot of people, I think.
Yeah. So Mikey Nez, the bassist of Alice in Chains, came up to me at like our second trade show in 2015, and he was like, "Oh, you make the beat, buddy?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Yeah, I just bought one 2 months ago. I've been writing all my new music with it."
Wow.
And I was like, "Dude, I learned to play guitar listening to your music."
Yeah, that's super cool.
It's so freaking cool.
That is so really cool. Yeah, you must have felt amazed. That's like if I'm, I don't know, doing something in like Metallica's like, "Hey man, I really like your podcast." You know?
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Yeah.
That would be that's got to just feel so good. And
it was amazing. It's very fulfilling.
It
blew my mind.
I gotta say, you're much smarter than they made you look in the movie. Do you get that all the time?
I appreciate it. People have said that.
Yeah.
I also get that I'm much more handsome than they portray me in the movie. I say I have way better hair.
I'll leave that up for debate. Yeah. Man,
I like that line. Only Hollywood could give me a full head of hair.
That's right.
So
that's right.
But thank you. I do appreciate that. I mean, the movie, they changed a lot. It's a Hollywood
flick
for sure.
I love the invention. I was actually talking about the other one that is going to change the world.
Yeah.
The guitar thing's cool, but this. Stand back, everyone.
So this is what I actually am really excited about now. That was the reason I mentioned that was because that was my first invention, and since then I've come out with 6 other products, musical products. I don't know if we have time to get into them, but just very short one. This is the simplest one. It's a product that organizes your cables.
Oh,
so it's called the Cably.
XLR cable winding. How does that not exist already?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I know. I couldn't believe it didn't exist. I was playing some shows and I had like 7 cables and it was taking me forever to wrap it around my arm. And I was like, I just need like a freaking cable and a wheel and boom.
I can't believe that's one of those that's so, because you go, that doesn't exist? Okay. And you make it and immediately everyone needs it who uses that.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's our simple version. We also came out with the world's most advanced looper pedal. It's not plugged in, so you can't really see how cool it is, but it's got like a touch screen and Wi-Fi. For the musicians, they'll know what I'm talking about, a looper pedal. It's a common thing, but we came out with, it's like almost like a digital audio workstation in a looper pedal. It's like a hybrid of like Pro Tools.
Yeah.
or
we can link to
Logic.
that we can link to the Singular Sound site in the show notes as well.
Perfect.
But show me the Instafloss, man. That's where I'm like, I don't want to floss my teeth again. After this interview.
So this product is the Instafloss, as you mentioned, is the first product that is not music related. I came up with this with my brother, and we were eating mango, and mango gets all those fibers stuck in your teeth, and so we were flossing our teeth afterwards, and we're like, man, this is such a pain in the ass. I wish we had a machine that could floss our teeth.
Yeah, no kidding.
Because everybody hates to floss. So we started batting around ideas, and eventually we came up with this. It's called the Instafloss, and it's like a improved version of a Waterpik water flosser. The difference between this and a Waterpik is a single jet of water that you have to trace your gum line, both the top and the bottom and the inside, which is very difficult to do from behind your teeth. And you also have to keep it at an exact 90-degree angle to the tooth. So what we did was we created this like H-shaped manifold, and it has 12 jets of water instead of 1, and they shoot from the sides. So all you have to do is bite, and this turns as well. So all you have to do is you bite in over here, and go to the side, and you're done.
It's amazing.
In 10 seconds, you just sweep it across.
I know people are like, wait, is Jordan kidding about this? First of all, you have to send me one of those. Like,
of course.
I will absolutely use it every single day because I floss.
Yeah.
I hate doing it. I do it every night. I try to do it in the morning, but I'm too effing lazy because I just woke up, and it just looks way better and way more efficient. I want one for my kid. You probably don't have kid sizes yet.
Yeah. Not yet, but we are going to make that.
And I'm thinking like, what if we don't need to throw plastic string in the toilet, or which you're not supposed to do, or in the garbage anymore every night, and drool on my dirty fingers. Of course, I wash my hands, but I'm still shoving my fingers in my mouth, right? Like, it's a whole thing. Instead, I have this device that actually does it even better and works in 10 seconds instead of 5 minutes or however long it takes me to floss while I'm watching YouTube. Really good. I'm not kidding. I'm emailing you my mailing address after this because I want one of those things.
Yeah, please do. I'd be happy to send you one.
Thank you very much. Incredible story. Thanks so much for coming on the show, man. I hope we sell enough Instafloss to have made this worth your time. I think we probably will.
I hope so too. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, anyone who wants to see it can go to instafloss.com. It's like Instagram, but floss, instafloss.com. And you can see, we have a video showing how it works, and you could also order it. We're actually in the middle of producing it right now, the first production run, and we are going to deliver the first units to customers in June.
Wow, so amazing! But will I get mine before, or am I going to be on back order? But that's the question.
I will do my best to get it to you as soon as possible.
Yeah, put me in that VIP stack for the Instafloss.
You got it, Jordan.
David, thank you very much, man. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for checking out this entire episode of The Jordan Harbinger Show. If you're interested in exploring this topic further, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There, we dive even deeper on this and many other topics. In the audio podcast, I also close open loops, cover things discussed off camera, off air, and give some parting lessons from our guest. You can find The Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any podcast app, or at jordanharbinger.com. And also, if you found this episode useful, please share it with those you care about. Last but not least, like, comment, and subscribe.